Welcome, everyone. This is your friend, the DN What If, here with another exciting fanfiction. Today, we're diving into the story of what if Deku saved her and became number one? If you enjoy this video, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more fanfiction content just like this. Now, let's get started with the fanfic. Midoriya Izuku stared at the charred remnants of his notebook as the wind ruffled the water-warped pages. He clenched his teeth to stave off tears. Another notebook destroyed, this time his dreams dashed along with it. For the first time in a long time, he thought about not buying a new one. He thought about leaving this reminder of his hopes, his aspirations, his everything at the top of this building. Because maybe he didn't want to stand up again, only for the next person he came across to tell him he shouldn't shoot for the stars. Maybe he didn't want to be told that, even with his gadgets, even with his intelligence, Midoriya Izuku's dream was nothing more than that. A dream. Izuku drew in a shuddering breath. A drowning feeling of resignation weighed on his shoulder, settling in the pit of his stomach. Hadn't he known this all along? What did you do? Hadn't he been told this a million times over by every single person he knew? Is that thing even my son? Hadn't his own parents told him? That quirk's not its dash. What was it they called him? Villainous. With a glance at his surroundings, he distantly realized that he had reached the edge of the roof now. His brain brought him half an idea, a taunt. Take a swan dive off the roof of a building. And wouldn't it be so easy, Izuku thought to himself as he watched cars move down the road, unaware of his internal plight. It wasn't like Kaken brought up something he hadn't already thought of before. He knew he was worthless. Izuku had no one. He had nothing but memories of people who abandoned him. Nothing but an empty apartment and a lonely beach. He stepped closer, putting his hands on the railing. To get a better view, the terrified part of his mind soothed as he leaned forward. Vertigo hit him subtly, his vision tipping as he did, the flat edge of the rail pressing uncomfortably into the skin of his exposed palms. The backs of his feet lifted off the ground, the wind kissed his neck lightly, a whistle, not a roar, as he started falling forward to it, ripping himself away from the ledge, away from his poisonous thoughts. A wave of nausea hit him. Knees buckling underneath him, his hands hit the concrete to stop him from falling completely, scraping across the floor as his elbows gave out too. God, what had he been about to do? Izuku gasped for air, feeling deprived of it, and scrambled back to his backpack, to his notebook. Every inch of him shaking, he shoved the ruined notebook inside his bag, not caring that he was destroying it further, and bolted down the stairwell that all might left through. He tried not to let himself think about the distant explosion, the thing that broke him out of his trance, the only reason he was stumbling down these stairs instead of. Bile burned in his throat as he finally reached the bottom of the stairs. Breath hitching, legs burning, hands trembling, he ran. He ran until another explosion brought him out of his terror-filled haze. The crowd obscured his view and he realized that his feet had led him to another hero fight. A glimpse of an all-too-familiar swamp green. No, he begged, pushing his way through the crowd. Please don't let it be. The sludge villain. And the heroes. The heroes were just standing there. Izuku turned his gaze back to the villain, to the victim it took, and remembered the feeling of slime forcing itself down his throat, of suffocating. The sludge writhed as another explosion boomed within him, turning to reveal the face of his new victim. Desperate, blood-red eyes met his and Izuku didn't have to think. He didn't need to do anything but move. Shouts followed him as he rushed past every bystander. He could care less that this was dangerous, he could care less about himself. If he had died in that underpass, they wouldn't even be in this situation. When his backpack collided with his body, the villain turned, eyes gleaming with rage when they fell upon him, the boy who All Might saved. Kaken heaved in a gasp of air. Izuku didn't stop, though, because one gulp of air was not enough to save him. Lifting a 1,000-pound weight off of a locked box in his chest, Izuku reached inside himself, as he sunk his bare hands into the slime, and pulled, ignoring the nausea that rolled over him at the feeling of his hands being encased in sludge, ignoring the reminder of his own near-death experience. The sludge villain fell still and Izuku could almost hear the silence of the crowd behind him over the roaring in his ears. Energy he hadn't felt in years flooded him, dizzying him. Heat furled in his core and stars danced in his clouding vision. This was the feeling of something he pretended he didn't have, something he didn't want. This was the feeling of a quirk. A genetic mutation, Izuku would later find out upon his own research. Unique from his mother's telekinesis and his father's, he shuddered at the reminder of his father or the slow ache overcoming him. Fire breathing. Initiated by physical contact, not limited by five-finger activation, his quirk put people in their own heads and forced them to agonize over their own flaws. Insecurity, he dubbed it quietly, where no one would ever hear the name. Reminders of how he obtained such information made the ache building in his head worsen. It manifested when he was touching his parents. They froze at some point during the movie they were watching, and only when Izuku moved to use the restroom did they snap out of his quirk. A fight broke out. The movie had been an act of goodwill from his mother, a silent, tense ordeal to distract his father. Evidently, the night was not as subdued as they hoped it would be. That hellspawn is not my child. After his father left, she could barely stomach a glance at him. Before they shared the pain, they were in it together. Apparently, that stopped the night his quirk manifested. They never told anyone about his quirk. She told him that he was quirkless and he didn't deny it, not when it was the first time she had properly looked him in the eyes since that night. What the hell, Deku? Kaken's snapping voice tugged him back into reality. A reality where blood dripped down his nose and every inch of him ached. The pro-heroes finally moved and All Might, that FNGBSC, shouted something about having empty soda bottles. Izuku didn't wait around to see what they would do to him for interfering. The moment their eyes turned away from him, Izuku faded into the background. He had always been good at that. His feet predictably led him to Dagoba Beach. Was it that he never failed to wander back here when things became especially unbearable? Why, when bittersweet memories stab his fragile heart every time he sees the glittering view of the sunset. For the second time that day, Izuku leaned against a railing, this time for support. He didn't even realize he was falling until his back hit the sand. Katsuki hated the way his throat couldn't get rid of the feeling of that sludge fucker's slime squirming down his esophagus. He hated that, no matter how much he spit, the taste of that disgusting slime wouldn't go away. But he hated Deku more than any of that. The nerd had a quirk. A FING quirk. The weakling had been looking down at him this whole time, huh? Laughing behind his back every time he called him quirkless? He brushed off the heroes, hell he brushed off All Might's quick check on him before reporters swarmed him and ran after that med nerd. Katsuki needed answers and he wasn't afraid to beat them out of Deku. His malice stalled when he caught sight of the blood trail he followed, but returned when he thought of the likely cause. "You freak lied to me," his inner voice snarled. Deku was at the garbage beach, or all FNG places, leaning against the railing and casting a shadow from the sunset in front of him. "Oi, Deku!" Katsuki's smug grin froze when Deku fell forward and over the railing without so much as a glance back. The trash, his mind thought frantically as he darted forward. What if he fell on something and impaled himself? Seemed like something his dumbass would do. To a suppressed amount of relief, he caught sight of Deku laying in the sand like an idiot. Landing on the sand next to him with a thud, he grabbed a handful of the nerd's collar to yell at him, only for the blood to drain from his face when he realized he wasn't breathing. "Amnit, breathe, you be." Something slammed into his chest like a freight train and Izuku lurched up, gagging on the copper-tasting liquid in his throat. Blood spewed carelessly from his mouth as he coughed and his body hit someone else's. Was that Deku? Izuku inhaled sharply, throwing him into another coughing fit. "So you were hiding your quirk this whole DMN time? Is that it?" He prodded over Izuku's receding spasms. "Kaken," he stuttered, mouth thick with blood. "Don't kaken me," the boy hissed, pushing Izuku off of him with a surprising lack of force. He stood, glaring down at him as sand clinging to him. "No wonder you wanted to hide your quirk. It's so useless you can't even use it without FNG dying." Kaken walked away and Izuku didn't call out to him. Waking up in the middle of the night, stiff and sore, was hellish and made Izuku groan when he attempted to move. The knife gouging his brain wasn't any help as he stumbled to his feet, but the world didn't stop turning when something like yesterday happened, and certainly not for Izuku. The apartment was as depressing as the morning he left. As the definitely ruined, but maybe salvageable uniform churned in the washing machine, Izuku messed with a small army figure, thinking of his mother. He tried to steer clear of thoughts concerning her for a multitude of reasons. 1. The last day he saw her had been over 8 years ago. 2. During the 2 years she stayed after his father left, she steadily grew colder towards him. And then 3, which he added to the list only recently, she finally decided she could stop paying for the apartment. Why would she keep doing it in the first place, you ask? Izuku honestly had no idea. Guilt? Pity? Old-time sake? She sent in cash a week before rent was due. Always the same amount, which exceeded the actual cost of the bills since he rarely used half of the utilities. The landlady took the bills without looking up from her spreadsheet and never asked him where his mother was. Who cared, after all, when he was the only tenant who never pushed for another week to gather their money? The most Miss Tara would do was thank him for not being a little beach like all the other shitheads I house, which Izuku chose to take as a compliment. He saved the money, what he could of it at least, and planned on using it to pay for Yue's tuition. Izuku had been saving money all his life, his clothes, his shoes, hell, the untamable bird's nest on his head, was proof of his frugal ways. Sturdy trainers, patched clothes, cheap food, odd jobs, Izuku would do anything to earn money and keep it. Yue might have been a hero school with a fair price range for their tuition fees, but that didn't mean the price wasn't steep. This, sadly, was the reason he sold his hero merch, All Might memorabilia included, a week ago. Even though parting with it caused something to shrivel in his heart, even if the guy was an a-hole, he still loved heroes. Aside from that, anything with economical value in the apartment had been sold long ago, leaving him with a barren residence and a meager amount of objects with sentimental value. But, by God, it had been worth it. Izuku was in the final stretch. At this rate, he would actually be able to attend UA if he passed the exams. He just had to stay low and hope nothing FING tried him, because if something sent him to the hospital it would be a shitshow in more ways than one. Rent? He could manage, especially with that new metal and mechanics shop opening up a few miles out. Food? Pisage, he had been living off simple food for years. Tuition, in the bag, so long as he didn't break somebody's million-yen car or something. Things felt kind of great, actually. Sure, Izuku had been, well, dead a few hours ago, but damn it, he was alive now, and this wild aspiration of his truly had a chance of becoming real. The army figure in his scarred palm, small and colors flecking off from age, pressed against his skin. It offered reassurance and doubt, but ultimately, the pleasant memories won this time. A week later, when he heard the metal and mech shop opened, Izuku gathered his collection of usable parts and cleaned them meticulously. There were no other shops in the area that he could go to sell these things, so he couldn't afford for them to turn him away. Literally. Kaken left him alone, aside from the occasional fiery glare, and the others stopped asking questions on account of that signature, Kaken glare, being turned on them when they stepped too close. Something inside him writhed, the churning like a pot of boiling water overflowing. The overflowing bit especially. It was like a fish in his grip, slippery, and thrashing to escape. And like hell he would let. Things were going well, thank you, and he did not need his jacked-up Quirk FANG up his plans. The constant aching was the icing on the cake, and the piercing headaches were the cherry on top of it. That was a reasonable reaction, though, Izuku supposed. Dying seemed a little extreme, but he had kept his Quirk locked up for 8 years. Was this what withdrawal felt like? The manifestation of his Quirk hurt, but this was another level of danger. The banner on the inside of the windowed wall said, "Now open," in big, curvy, red and orange font. A bell chimed pleasantly when he pushed into the building, the box heavy in his lithe arms. The room he walked into housed bland, off-white walls decorated with succulents and objects standing out with bright color. Blue padded chairs lined the wall, the counter at the other side of the room reaching both ends of the wall. A gate and latch remained closed, and everything felt utterly new. Overall, it was your cliché receptionist room. His mouth quirked up when he caught sight of the mini present mic figure by a similarly situated plastic cockatoo on its perch. Izuku built a radio because it seemed easier than fixing another phone that actually emitted sound. His phone was a relic and it looked the part too. He found it while scavenging and kept it for no reason other than the ridiculous hope that one day someone would want to communicate with him. With the radio, on the other hand, Izuku worked until the voices and melodies came through the speaker clearly. Present Mix Radio Show quickly became one of his most visited stations. He was loud and exuberant, something Izuku could never be. The music he played stayed in Izuku's head for days, humming in his veins and beating with his heart. The man was amusing too, whipping out subtly snarky remarks and deceiving wit just as much as he said a corny joke. When because he could not afford to think if he attended UA, would Izuku meet him? God, how would he cope with meeting him and Eraserhead? How would he not faint on the spot when all of his teachers were his literal heroes? Eraserhead was an underground hero, so Izuku supposed he maybe shouldn't be aware of him, but he was exactly the hero that Izuku wanted to be. Out of sight, working primarily in ambush and close-ranged attacks. His quirk erased others, but he fought entirely quirkless against mutation quirks, so Izuku could too, especially with his inventions. A tall woman with salmon pink hair grinned at him from behind the counter. Her cropped hair, spiked up like it had its own personality, had nothing on her golden eyes. The color dipped into copper and she blinked, her smile becoming more of a show. Quirk, his brain warned. She's seeing something she doesn't like. Damn it. He wanted to sell her sheet, not have a subtle quirk used on him. Hi, he said quickly, heaving the box onto the counter. Do you buy scrap metal in parts? She pulled the box closer and rummaged through the organized, flatter pieces of metal to see the parts he brought. I sure do from you, she said, eyes glued to the contents of the box. The knot in his chest loosened, a sigh of relief passing his lips. Again her eyes flashed bronze, flicking to him, and he tensed. Her eyes drifted to the exposed scars scaling his left arm and his patience snapped. Stop that. He took a step back, hackles rising and his eyes narrowing. Do you want to buy them or not? Stop what? Using your quirk on a minor without consent, he gritted out. That's illegal, you know. Not that he would report it. That would require going to the police, who would probably ask for his guardian. The burly woman laughed, setting him even further on edge. You're kind of fiery, you know that, green bean? She produced a pen and clipboard, sliding it across the counter. I don't know where the hell you found parts like this, but I'd be dimmin' stupid to turn you away. Read the form, write your basic info, sign on the dotted line, blah blah blah. A rivet of fear speared through him as he sat on one of the chairs and began reading. Where your parents sprout? They send you over with all this by yourself? Bitterness tasted sour in his dry mouth. Busy, he muttered, standing and handing over the filled-out papers. Right. She tapped the paper with the pen. Midoriya, you say that cash is the preferred payment. I don't presently have enough to pay you, so would you prefer digital payment? I don't think anyone wants to walk around with this much money on them, anyway. He glanced at the box, then at her. How dash, he gulped. How much money do you owe me? Stupid question, he realized immediately. If she couldn't pay him right off the bat, then it was a reasonable amount more than he guessed all this was worth. Never mind, he added nervously. 1. Never ask someone what they owe you. People will never pay if they think they can get away with it. 2. I'm guessing you've never sold anything like this before. And 3. I owe you dash. Izuku's knees went weak when she told him the number. ODMN. Oh sheet. Oh if dash. He laughed, high-pitched and unbelieving, hands rising to do who knows what. That was, oh God, that was way more than he thought he would get for a few sheets of metal and used parts. Maybe miracles did happen. Whoa, you good kid? His eyes snapped back to the lady. Kinda blanked out on me for a second. I can wait, he croaked. Pay me what you can and I'll wait for the rest. Alright, give me a second. In the apartment, Izuku held his head in his hands, a mad giggle that matched the grin on his face. I can make it, he whispered, breaking the silence. The world, I'm making it to you. At this point, I feel like I should put you down as a business supplier, Mitsu said as he put down a box full of money-making material for the third time. He blushed and took the clipboard she offered, signing his name. Izuku would keep coming here and selling what he scavenged and cleaned for as long as she would let him. Tuition fees were a beach, and Izuku didn't have time for debt or interest adding up. He needed enough for 3 years, and he would pay his way through half of his second year by the end of the summer if he kept this up. Every Sunday, 30 minutes after they open, Izuku meets Mitsu and they exchange money, metal, and small talk. Mitsu showed off a picture of her wife and daughter. Izuku told her that he built things in his spare time. She pushed, a few times, for information on his parents but relented before he became too uncomfortable. Mitsu apologized for using her quirk on him without permission and explained her quirk. It was called Current State. When she activated it, her quirk revealed the physical and emotional state of a person to her. After some questioning on his part, Izuku found out that she received her answers through feelings rather than actual words. Mitsu described it as a compass, pointing her in the right direction. "Oh hey!" Mitsu burst the 5th time he showed up. "My wife, as you know, works the books, but May's coming in today to work on her inventions. They're dying to meet you, so feel free to come back around one-ish." Internally he balked. The short interactions he had here with Mitsu still kept them at acquaintance level. Coming in and meeting her family would break that barrier, that protective wall of security. Part of him, a traitorous, longing part, wanted to. Save for Mitsu, no one spoke kindly with him. No one turned their gaze upon him as if he mattered. His brain whispered that they might be like her, like Mitsu instead of his mom. "I'll see if I can make it," Izuku mumbled, not missing how Mitsu lit up. "Hell yeah!" she shouted after him as he exited the building. Izuku arrived at 1 o'clock on the dot and walked in without any preamble, tensing when he realized other people were sitting in the chairs. This was a business and it was the middle of the day. An employee stood in Mitsu's usual spot, looking bored and utterly uninterested as they lounged in the desk chair. They had a cat quirk, it seemed. Furred, pointed ears that flicked towards the sound of his entrance and slit pupils surrounded by blue irises darted to him. Lazily, she pressed a button and spoke into a microphone. "Aye boss, ya boy's here." Not 2 seconds later, a girl that looked like Mitsu's daughter burst into the room and grabbed him by his shoulders to push him further into the building. He gaped at the sheer size of space. Dozens of workers milled about and even more inventions were being tweaked. It was a mechanic's heaven. "Hi, I'm Hatsum," she shouted into his ear over the sudden whir of machinery. Future CEO of Hatsum Industries. Her hands on his shoulders sent bells ringing in his head, all of them screaming don't touch, but he put his shaking hands into the pockets of his cargo pants and offered her a smile as she practically wheeled him around. "Midoriya," he yelled. She let go of him without warning, causing him to shoot forward and stumble. They were in front of a red door. "Zuzu, open the door." Promptly he flushed red, eyes blowing wide. "What?" he asked breathlessly. "Open it." He wasn't too sure whether the handle would electrocute him or if this was a normal door because this certainly wasn't a normal girl. Still, he opened the door to reveal a smaller workspace with tables and stations. Mitsu and her wife looked over, their hands dropping from where they previously gestured with them. Ayumi looked the same as she did in the picture Mitsu showed him. Her eyes and braided hair shone, bright and silver, a stark contrast to her dark skin. Thin gray lines on her neck displayed the gills she could utilize. Her ears were fin-like and webbed, like her fingers, fanning out when they entered the room. "You came?" Mitsu cheered, rushing over with her wife. "Meet my wife, Ayumi, and my daughter, May." Ayumi waved a webbed hand, smiling softly. She gestured with her hands again and Izuku watched with curiosity. "Yumi says it's nice to meet you, Midoriya." He looked at her sharply, then back to Ayumi's hands. "That's a language?" All of them let out a laugh, making him redden. Mitsu nodded, though. "Yeah, good. Japanese Sign Language, or JSL for short. Ayumi's quirk only lets her talk underwater so all of us know it." "Really? Would it be clear underwater? Or maybe garbled? Can you breathe underwater, too?" "Wait, you have gills, sorry." Are you able to withstand water pressure if you go deep? Do your ears help you hear better above and under the water? Or just one of those? Do your gills seal when you're out of water? Do you have a preference for salt or fresh water? Does it matter at all? What about Dash? See, I told you, Mitsu grinned. He's a riot. Ayumi smiled weakly, looking at him as if he was an enigma. Mei, on the other hand, lit up and began vibrating. Mom, you didn't tell me he asked those questions. She cried out in betrayal. We could have made so many babies by now if I had known. Izuku blinked, then promptly turned red, stepping back. He glanced at Mistu, who appeared exasperated, and Ayumi, who was having the time of her life, laughing silently. Hatsum Mei, she began tiredly. Explain yourself before he passes out. They're my inventions. She shouted, grabbing his shoulders and putting her face inches from his. Mom says you invent things and bring premium scrap. I'm keeping you. Mei did actually keep him in her own way. She began showing up when he dropped off his weekly findings and proceeded to drag him into her workshop to ask his opinion on her babies. See, if I can just figure out how to disregard the laws of gravity, then my baby will take flight. Why don't you just do away with the propellers and put in the hover tech that the shield company makes? Izuku questioned, thinking of the parts he had previously brought in. If they're accessible in some way, I could probably find you the parts by the time I come back. Dash. Only with the strength of weeks of sifting through and hauling pounds of scrap metal was he able to stay upright when Mei slammed into him, stealing him into a suffocating hug. He tensed, feeling her skin connect with his, and shoved down the panic that shot up at the contact. The clothes he wore scratched against one of Kaken's latest burns, but he held in the resulting hiss. The scars on his left arm tingled, unused to the amount of pressure her arm put on them. Are you going to UA? Mei asked, somewhat hopefully, when she released him. The question sounded so different coming from her. She wasn't asking it to mock him or put him down. Mei was asking him because she wanted him to go. Yes, I am. Goosebumps erupted over his skin when her face broke out into a glorious grin. Mei was happy that he wanted to go to UA. The first time he brought them all the Dagoba, it had been upon Mei's incessant nagging and pleading. Ayumi and Mitsu were curious too, so they had decided against fighting Mei's will. Their jaws collectively dropped when he threw his arm out with a weak tada. To be fair, at this point he had cleared out half the beach on his own. Sometimes, when the thought of returning to the apartment became unbearable, Izuku holed up inside a pile. A part of him, desperate and longing, hoped to catch a glimpse of purple mist and glowing yellow eyes, but he often pushed those thoughts aside. Izuku took the Hatsums to the other side of the beach where they were unlikely to search far enough to find his hideout. It had been a month since they all officially met, and since then Izuku had taken up Ayumi's, admittedly surprising, offer to help him learn how to fight. They had an entire room in their house dedicated for training, and Izuku was never one to pass up such an amazing opportunity handed to him on a silver platter. This dash, Mitsu gestured wildly at the mounds of garbage, is where you get all your scrap? Ayumi tugged Mei off of the railing before she could fall over it and turned to him with careful curiosity. So you rummage around all this, clean it, and bring it to us to sell? She signed slowly, letting him catch the words as she made them. Izuku, who did little else with his time other than study, analyze, tinker, and haul garbage, had begun learning sign language. Having a conversation with someone, through somebody else's translation, could be a hassle, and Izuku wanted to be able to speak with her. I wish my moms would let me soft through scrap metal all day, Mei whined. Both of her moms stiffened, glancing at each other as Mei pulled Izuku down to the beach by his arm. Where are his parents? Mitsu said aloud, idly in concern. Ayumi frowned, watching Izuku pull Mei out of the way of a tilting trash pile. We should ask if we could meet them later. Mitsu grumbled, leaning against the railing to face the city. Already tried a few times, Yumi. He shuts me down faster each time I bring it up. Yumi clicked her tongue in annoyance, joining her wife on the railing. He must have a lot of free time to learn enough of JSL to hold a proper conversation with me, bring in his own gadgets, and collect all of his findings to bring to us. Mitsu turned to face the ocean, observing as Izuku pushed a pile of collapsing trash to the side, where it clattered loudly. "It's dangerous out here." She chewed the inside of her cheek. What parent in their right mind would let their kid do this? I would certainly not be trusting enough to let May run around with a bunch of strangers all day. It would be easy to conclude that he has subpar parents then, no? Sure, but I just don't want to assume, you know? She twirled their keys on her fingers by the ring. What if they're busy people or they're trying to be good parents? Ayumi raised a hand to Mitsu's face, turning her head to face her. She smiled gently. Then we should decide what to think when we meet them. Being able to wear gloves again turned out to be a godsend. He used to wear them when he was little and his mom would throw them into his face, horrified at the mere idea of having to touch him, but Kaken exploded the safeguard once he noticed them. Izuku couldn't give him a response when he asked why stupid Deku wanted to wear gloves in the middle of spring, and bam, bye-bye gloves. The only solution to that became focusing on keeping his quirk locked away and never ever touching anyone for any reason. With the Hatsums though, he felt the safety of gloves settle back into place. Izuku's mind wandered to thoughts of his quirk too easily lately. He doubted it was strong. How could it be after years of disuse? The repercussions of using it alone made his resolve to never use it cement itself further. Questions loomed in the back of his head. The queries about his quirk, because how could he resist when he analyzed the quirks of others so deeply? With every notebook he finished, every quirk he scrutinized, Izuku realized that there had to be more to his quirk than he concluded. The tiny shred of information he had, information that he hadn't even garnered, could be the tip of the iceberg. His mind whirred with possibilities and questions that he refused to find the answers to. That was where his knowledge ended, and Izuku knew that there was more. Could he import himself into the person's mind? If so, could he interact with them, or would he be a spectator? Could the person rationalize and accept that, yeah, they're flawed, but damn it, everyone is? Would his quirk still hold them inside their mindscape? How long could he hold a willing volunteer? What about a villain who wanted out? Stop it, he berated himself. This quirk is never going to be used. His questions would go unanswered. He could be a great hero without his quirk. All Might's voice echoed in his head, his words forever branded into his psyche. You can't be a hero. FING watch me, he snarled back. UA exams were tomorrow. May planned on applying for a spot in the support course and Izuku wished her future teacher luck. He knew she would scare the shit out of students and faculty alike. God, he could already picture the face of some poor support student as she grabbed them by the shoulders, shouting, "Do you want to make babies with me?" For Izuku, the hero course was his only route. When he initially did research on the physical and written portions of the exam, Izuku had been shocked by how much the physical exam favored those with flashy quirks. Fighting against robots was meant for people with quirks like All Mights or Kakens. What about people whose quirk relied on people? A torrent of anger flickered through him. Did the faculty seriously think that physical quirks were the only useful ones? It seemed a little hypocritical when two of the teachers would have had to claw their way into the hero course. What had Midnight done when her quirk was of no use against towering machines? What had Eraserhead done when there were no quirks to erase? The guidelines of UA only recently changed to allow quirkless students in, but only a few years prior had they begun allowing people to apply for the use of homemade support items to use in their exams. How many students fell through the cracks because of their implicit bias? In the morning, Izuku picked at the vibrant tones of color on his nails that Ayumi painted on him a few days prior and checked his mental list. Close. Granola bar. Backpack. Said backpack was the most interesting part of the items he carried with him out to the car that the Hatsums were currently sitting in. May roughly pulled him inside, her excitement bleeding into her strength. Both of them were built like brick walls at this point. From having to haul machinery around Dagoba and the shop. Have everything you need? Mitsu inquired as he buckled in. Yep, he nodded. May grabbed his face with both of her hands, pulling him nose to nose with her. Zuzu, she started, sounding far more serious than he has ever heard her. Are you ready to stick it to the UA faculty? Hell yeah, Mimi. Ayumi snorted, glancing at Mitsu, who shrugged at the silent accusation. He rarely cursed when they were first becoming comfortable around each other, but after 9 months around them all, he could curse enough to make Kaken blush. The ride passed quickly, their departure onto the walkways that led to UA full of hugs and encouragement. At the stairs, he glanced back, briefly meeting Kaken's eyes. He was bundled up in nice clothes far nicer than anything Izuku ever owned, and stalked down the path silently. His eyes narrowed at Izuku and he hastily looked back at Mei, who continued her rant on how bogus one of her mother's competitors' prices were for their services. "I'd say good luck," Mei started, a grin forming on her features. "But you don't need it." She slapped him on the back, practically knocking the air out of him, and skipped away to find the support course exams. During the written exams, he found himself intrigued by the fact that there were optional open-ended questions. They surrounded his thoughts on their current society and touched base with the morality of having hero schools such as UA. He reached the end of the page and raised his hand. Ectoplasm, or perhaps an ectoplasm clone, floated over to him. He asked if he could have more paper. Maybe ectoplasm provided it within a minute and stayed silent. Afterward, Izuku grabbed his backpack and made his way to a specified room, led by a maybe ectoplasm. Maybe ectoplasm didn't enter with him into the dark room. A few lights allowed him to see the silhouettes of several people sitting at a long table. The ominous effect given off by their shadowed faces didn't do shit for his confidence, but he set his backpack on the table provided for him and set himself into his FLSHU mode that Mei managed to find out about. When she did, she didn't want to let him crawl back into his shell and lose that fire she caught a glimpse of. It was more than what she usually saw. There was anger in it, ugly emotions that Izuku rarely expressed. "You've come to present us with support gear to use in your practical exam." A monotone voice drawled from the center of the table. There were no questions. Just a prompt. A simple invitation. Izuku refused to stutter, and for once he didn't. These people would listen to him. He needed them to allow him to use his support items. He brandished his multi-purpose knife first, explaining each tool. He had a feeling he caught their attention when he provided a demonstration of the jet of flames that the tiny thing could produce. From there, he segued beautifully into his gun and the bombs he would be shooting out of it. The transition from those to his shoes was slightly less smooth, but it wasn't absolutely horrendous, so he counted it as a win. The explanation of the physical exams passed without much fanfare. Well, aside from the fact that he was seated directly beside Kaken and got called out in front of an amphitheater of people for mumbling about present mic. In his t-shirt and shorts, Izuku loaded his gun and holstered it at his thigh. He flipped through his multi-tool and kicked the heels of his shoes together, testing their functionality. His shoes were made to increase mobility and provide some extra support for when he fired his gun. Knockback was a beach, and he braced his arms for it, thankful for the Hatsum's guidance in making them. They could hover and shoot him into the air if needed, but there was more experimentation to be had before any confidence could truly set in. Propelling seemed like the best choice to not chance his feet being blown up, and he told the people at the table that something could go wrong. Safety before pride. He knew impressions were important and that even if he couldn't see the people at the table they could most certainly see him, but being cocky and injuring himself after hyping himself up would be disappointing for the judges who would decide his fate. The shoes were really the only thing in his arsenal that he warned them about. The gun definitely could be considered a risk, but it was heat and hard impact that triggered an explosion. Heat produced when the gun fired and hard impact given when it smacked into something. The pouch at his hip was lined with a cooling system that didn't catch too much attention when he showed it off, but it was vital to not blasting himself to smithereens. Mei's machines tended to blow up and have bulk, but Izuku's were more discreet and had a stripe of rainbow. The shoes, for example, were dark in color, with flames of color rising on the sides. The bombs were a complex brew composed of ingredients that Mei squealed at. When put together, it created a slime-like substance that solidified when frozen and blew up in a surprisingly big explosion, for the ammo being the size of a large marble. The gun shot them specifically and could hold up to 10 at a time without blowing up. In a small bag that weighed heavily against Izuku's hip, he kept the rest of his ammunition. The gun, per Mei's nagging, was mostly black, and this was the product of her incessant warnings that someone would hate the lack of color on his baby, There were strips of rainbow running from the butt of the handle, up the barrel and to the muzzle. It resembled a very large Glock. Gay Glock, gay shoes, May listed off, peering over his shoulder as he tweaked his inventions. Gay gadgets, Izuku concluded. Gay life, May retorted, pumping her fist against his. An alarm sounded without warning and Izuku shot off instantly, his shoes propelling him into the faux city and leaving the other examinees in the dust. In the Hatsum house, if you didn't have reflexes, you died. Izuku lost count of all the times he had nearly been impaled, burned, slashed, blinded, dumped in water, electrocuted. He could go on. Present Mick's voice shook them from their stupor, sending the lot of them running after him. Tackling the head of the nearest robot, he practically tore off the piece of metal protecting its wiring. A quick scan and he jabbed at the robot's insides, his shoes flinging him back in time for it to explode. He grinned and shot deeper into the city. Wouldn't the explosives he showed us be more effective? All Might asked aloud, several of the staff around him nodding as they watched the boy ricochet from robot to robot. Nedzu eyed the boy who leaped from machine to machine, charging at them and only utilizing a simple tool to take apart robots that even some with destructive power balked at. His gun remained holstered to his thigh, his ammunition at his hip. He has a limited amount of firepower. If he used it all in the beginning, there might be nothing left to rapidly increase his score in the last half. Nedzu wiggled in his seat, watching as the boy helped another student out from under a collapsed robot. When he saw that the child was fine, Midoriya, Izuku ran off with a bit of good luck. The teachers around him inched away when they caught sight of the grin on his face. There was a reason some humans thought of him as a bear, after all. Nedzu picked up the sheets of paper Midoriya turned in, one among many who attempted his optional questions, but his views were controversial, bordering on radical. Nedzu designed his questions in a way from them to be taken in many directions. What do you think of society as it is? What is your opinion on hero schools? Two simple questions that garnered varying responses that were ultimately and boringly the same. But Nedzu was pleasantly surprised when Ectoplasm handed him the papers of the children who answered his questions. He especially liked the answer to his first question, as morality had never his strong suit. The society of heroes and villains that we have created is unsustainable. It is toxic. We see this best in the symbol of peace. For now, because of him, we are able to enjoy an era where crime is at an all-time low. But what happens when the symbol is gone? What happens when he inevitably retires? There will be a surge of crime, a wave of emboldened criminals that will be undaunted when All Might is not there to keep them in check. Who will we turn to? Endeavor, who has lusted after the number 1 slot for decades. There is a reason no one could surpass either of them. No one could pass Endeavor because he is merciless when it comes to achieving his goals. It is displayed in his ruthless methods and notorious rage. All Might is another matter entirely. He remained beyond reach because he works without stopping. Remember that month All Might vanished and everyone panicked? Even then, there had been a rise in local crime all around. Touching on Endeavor's behavior, therein lies another flaw. Being a hero does not mean the same thing it did during the vigilante era or beforehand. It is an occupation. Hero schools are where rows of children are sent to attempt to become heroes or support them, i.e. business marketing courses, support, or general education, where the majority of hero course rejects end up. Someone I knew as a child, my best friend, even manifested a powerful, flashy quirk. Like a flipped switch, he was surrounded by yes men and praised in abundance for his accomplishments. People turned blind eye to anything he did that could be considered wrong because of his quirk. They said, he'll be a great hero with a quirk like that. And that was it. Because his quirk was suited for heroism, that made him a hero. Heroes don't use their quirks on other children for fun or belittle everyone around them. No one should label a child a hero, not with what that word means nowadays. And since heroism has been broken from its definition, it isn't a far leap to say that the term villain has as well. What about the children with not so flashy quirks, not so heroic or useful? Every day, I see and hear people throw around the words hero and villain. I think of the man Endeavor maimed for stealing a bag of groceries, Of the woman who was arrested for vigilantism because she used her quirk on a bank robber. Villains, people labeled them. That man stole because his family was starving because of the high tax rates. Tax rates that will only continue to rise because heroes cause collateral damage wherever they go. Think of Mount Lady, who destroys entire streets each time she uses her quirk. Think of Death Arms, who regularly bashes in walls. That woman's quirk was ventriloquist. She took control of the 10 robbers the moment she was given the chance and held them until the police arrived, in turn suffering from severe quirk exhaustion. When she was discharged from the hospital a few days later, the police arrested her for illegal quirk usage. I won't disparage the police for arresting her for illegal quirk use. The problem is that this situation isn't original. Many other people have quirks that, with the right forethought, could save them from a similar situation. And that's exactly what happened. Another woman with a quirk that could trap people in bubbles with a touch and make them float pulled the same thing and saved a jewelry store full of people. She got a slap on the wrist while the other woman is spending several years in jail. I think of the children born powerful, like my friend, and wonder what happens if they don't want to be a hero, wonder if they are given a proper choice. I think of those with quirks like ventriloquist, who are forced to claw their way up the ladder when others are given an escalator. And what about those who fall? What do you think happens to the outcasts and so-called freaks, who give up? They become what everyone has always said they would become. What is a hero without a villain? They have no meaning. Hero society creates more villains than it will ever be able to fight. It has created a stigma around those with less desirable quirks, and it has put people into boxes. Villain. Civilian. The world we live in is made of shades of gray, not clean-cut like so many have been led to believe. We are living in an unsustainable world, one that will come crashing down on us one way or another if we don't make some serious changes. To say Nedzu was excited would be an understatement. I anticipate the ripples you'll make with those kinds of thoughts, Midoriya. Nedzu passed the papers to Shoyuta and he internally groaned because what devil child could have possibly caught the rat's attention? He accepted the papers and took note of the fact that it was flipped to the second question. What do you think of hero schools? Shoyuta wasn't sure if he wanted to read something that gave Nedzu that kind of glint in his black, beady little eyes, but he suppressed a sigh and read the answer. Hero schools, while necessary in the current time we are in, are schools that facilitate the idea of creating child soldiers. There is a reason that there has been debate on whether or not to have them. The hero career is one that not just anyone can take up. Students apply for the hero course for noble reasons, others for money, many for fame, but the bottom line is that they are all signing up to be heroes. Heroes are faced with life or death situations daily, so one would think that training them specifically for those types of situations would benefit them, right? It does, in many ways, prepare the students for their career of choice, but it also puts them in great danger while doing so. In UA, the sports festival is a necessary event to rake in the funds that keep the school running. It brings attention to the school, allows students in other courses to gain attention, and provides hero students the chance to show off their quirks and get internships. In theory, this is great for everybody, but what about those with quirks that have specifications or limitations? Their weaknesses are being broadcasted for the world to see just as their strengths are. Villains could easily find recordings of past festivals to analyze the quirks of the latest batch of heroes. Internships happen when a hero offers to take an apprentice on the job. Hero students signed up for this, yes, but the question of, should we allow this, comes into play. Students, children who are 15 to 16 years old, are taken out on patrols and face villains with their mentor beside them. This is after the sports festival, which means the students are sent out about a month and a half after they begin hero school. How much can the teachers cram into their heads in that amount of time? How much can they express and emphasize the seriousness of the job they are being sent out to do? What happens when a student slips up or can't handle a situation? The government places the lives of civilians in the hands of children. They put these hero students in the line of fire. There have been deaths during internships. Shoyuta stopped reading, turning to glare at Nedzu. He flipped back to Midoriya's previous answer and blinked at it in surprise. He turned to the first page, read the name, and glanced up at the screen, where Midoriya Izuku leaped onto the head of a two-pointer, saving the boy who had been cornered by three of them. Of course, this was the problem child that came up to them with the request of a bomb gun and a flame-throwing multi-tool. Despite the gleam in the principal's eyes, Shoyuta could feel his lips twitching to form a grin. He has potential. Toshinori could not tear his eyes from the boy if he tried to, because there he was. The child that he saved and who subsequently saved him and another student. Reporters and fans swarmed him the moment the fight was over, keeping him from following the boy for a few minutes. It ended up being too long. He wondered about the boy's quirk because, on his application, he was registered as quirkless. He wondered what the boy's quirk could be, how terrible he considered it if he was willing to lie on a formal document like this to hide it. On the rooftop, the boy had asked him, "Can I be a hero without a quirk?" And Toshinori said no. Though, watching the boy tear through the robots, seeing the light in his eyes brighter than they were during their last meeting, Toshinori cursed at himself. To put it bluntly, he bungled his first impression. Telling the boy he couldn't be a hero, and not half an hour later he was willing to put everything into teaching him and making him his successor. Midoriya's mood darkened when he told him what he thought was a harsh reality that the boy needed to accept. Toshinori could feel the words crushing him, chafing on his skin and ringing in his ears. "You can't be a hero." His hands curled into fists as Midoriya finally unholstered his gun. The boy hadn't lied when he said the ammunition packed a punch. The first robot to fall victim to an explosion was blasted to pieces, to the obvious joy of Midoriya, who smiled and looked down at his gun with pride as he stood alone in a street. Toshinori chuckled. "He's already proving me wrong." He counted 5 more shots before he would have to resort to tearing the robots apart again. If he spaced out the shots or could find a group, maybe he would be able to. A window shattered as he passed it, the glass grazing the skin on the top of his nose. Izuku flinched at the sound of glass falling onto the street. Rubble left from the destruction of the other examinees shook on the street from the vibrations. Following the noise, he turned onto a street with several other examinees on it. They all faced him, gaping at something behind him in abject horror. One of them screamed and bolted down the street, others following quickly once they snapped out of their shock. The zero-pointer stood tall above them all, the deafening grind of its inner mechanics almost muting out everything around him. Izuku stumbled back, ready to hightail it out of that monstrosity's way, when he heard a shriek over the zero-pointer's thunderous movements. He stopped and scanned the street, ignoring the few who screamed at him to leave. His eyes snagged on a brown-haired girl who alternated from pressing her hand to her mouth to putting her hands on the rubble that had fallen over her, pushing at it desperately. Izuku kicked his shoes against the ground without another thought, propelling himself across the street in the blink of an eye. He nearly flew past her, the force from his shoes too much, but his hand caught the edge of the piece trapping her, the jagged rock slicing into his unscarred palm as the hunk of concrete shifted off of her. Ignoring the pain that rocketed through his system, Izuku landed beside the girl as she clawed at the road to get herself further away from the zero-pointer. Quirk overuse. Wounds in her leg oozed blood through her leggings. She must have been completely out of it by now. "I'll get you out," Izuku promised her as he lifted her off the ground. He glanced up, his breath catching in his throat when he took in the zero-pointer's distance from them. The girl was depending entirely on him to get her out of here, but how would he do that? His shoes were only stable enough to carry him long distances without blowing up. His gun. His FING gun. He let the girl's weight fall completely against his front, looking at the tiny switch at the handle of the gun with the kind of solemnness found at a funeral. "I worked so hard on you too," he whined, though the words were lost to everyone. But him. He flipped on the emergency switch and hurled it as high and as far as he could. Not daring to stand still any longer, Izuku held the girl against his chest, twisted, and hurtled down the street as rapidly as his shoes would allow with the weight of 2 people. His shoes sputtered under their combined weight, but they valiantly kept on functioning, aiding in their escape as they pelted down the road. The explosives went off. He tucked the girl's head into his shoulder and jumped into the air with a grunt. As soon as the resulting air of the blast reached them, it moved them further away. Izuku kept the girl's head against his body, glad enough for her when shrapnel dug into his back. They still had the fall. The ground was coming too fast and his shoes were busted. The best he could do, he thought grimly as he relinquished his hold on the girl's head, was break the fall for her. He flipped them in the air so that he would land first and braced for impact. For pain as the robot bits were shoved deeper into his body. The girl let out a scream that barely reached his still ringing ears and looked frantically at him. Maybe this is why tuition is so high, Izuku thought as the pain from a bit of a giant robot that had just crushed a fake city radiated through his body. His hand throbbed terribly, the pain distracting him from the darkness beginning to cloud the edges of his vision. Are you okay? Blinking, he realized that they stopped falling. Weird, Izuku had expected a lot more agony and suffering and whatnot. This was more of a floaty feeling. Perhaps shock was much more of a drag than he realized. The girl abruptly turned them, sending a wave of nausea coursing through him as they swayed. In the air? The weightless feeling disappeared without warning and both of them crashed into the asphalt. Izuku coughed, the abrupt irritation of his wounds jolting him out of his daze. How's your leg? He gulped down the lump in his throat, coughing again because of the dust he inhaled. Present mix announcements sounded throughout the city, his voice making it through the cotton in his ears. The end of the exam. Izuku hoped he passed. Oh my god, you're back, you dash. I'm fine, he said as nonchalantly as he could manage. Just a light stabbing. He closed his eyes and blocked out as much as he could. He'd felt things digging into his back before. Things were usually explosive when it came to Izuku and Mei, but he'd never experienced having so many things lodged in his back. Suddenly, but not unbiddenly, relief washed over him and his body untensed. The girl caught his eye and he offered her the best smile he could manage before giving in to the beckoning darkness at the edge of his vision. Silence stretched for what felt like hours in the observation room, none of them unfazed enough to make an utterance. Midnight promptly broke it with an astonished, holy sheet, as one of the stronger applicants lifted Midoriya off of the torn-up street, per Chiyo's request. You totally thought Nedzu was going to let that thing crush them, didn't you? I did not. Nedzu rewound the video, causing all the chatter to cease as they observed Midoriya's actions a second time. They watched as the boy turned to run with the others and froze at the sound of Uraraka's cry. Watched as he scanned the rubble and flew towards her without a second thought and freed her. Getting the rubble off her had been a fluke, but everything else? Using his last explosives to stop their biggest threat? Using the resulting blast to propel him and the girl even further? Twisting in the air and planning to shield the girl from the fall with metals sticking out of his back? Teachers of Yua, Nedzu addressed, feeling quite giddy. Meet Midoriya Izuku, our top scorer in both the practical and written exams. Nedzu rolled the video back to Izuku standing in the dust, the girl leaning heavily against him as he stared at the zero-pointer with determination instead of fear. Again, silence struck the staff. Consciousness came sluggishly and he awoke to the faint smell of rubbing alcohol. Like a whip cracked against him, he shot up, uncaring of the stings and throbbing the abrupt action caused him. Panic knocked on the doors of his mind, brandishing a key, as he surveyed the white walls and fluorescent lights beaming above him. Voices murmured through a door, their close proximity rubbing coarsely against his instincts. This must be Yue's infirmary, he thought, the cold of the tiles sending goosebumps up his legs as he slid off the bed. He glanced at the workspace nearby, freezing at the sight of his photo paperclipped to the open folder. Hastily, he approached the desk, rifling through the information they had on him. The Hatsums were his emergency contacts. He was registered as quirkless, his non-existent medical history. Izuku backed away from the table, finding nothing out of line, and lamented his t-shirt's absence in the chill of the room. Checking the windows ended up being for naught. There were no latches for him to open the glass panes trapping him from the outside world. The door, large and menacing, was his only option if he wished to leave. People still spoke on the other end of it, discouraging him from taking either option. Stay, and face them when they came in, or open the door, and hope they allowed him to exit? The choice was inevitably made for him, his indecision leaving him with too much to think and weigh on. Rather anticlimactically, an old, tiny woman shuffled into the room, her cane a giant syringe. Recovery girl? Slipped out before he could stop it. Her eyes darted to him and he nearly cursed himself for calling her attention. Before he could properly begin having an anxiety attack, All Might walked in, effectively cutting off any ramblings he had been about to stutter out. Both of them froze at the sight of each other, neither expecting the confrontation. Recovery Girl, evidently too exasperated or too old to be willing to put up with their antics, waved him back to the bed. "You were unconscious for longer than I thought you would be. Are you sleeping all right?" He almost laughed at the notion. Izuku hadn't slept right in 8 years, nor had a proper haircut, but it must have shown on his face because he bonked him on the head with the end of her syringe. "Don't make that face at me, young man. I'll take that as a no." She paused, moving behind him to check his back. It set off all kinds of alarms when her hand gently touched the tender skin of his recent injury, causing him to tense. Recovery Girl pulled away immediately, something he silently thanked her for. "The Hatsums will be here shortly," the heroine informed him kindly. "I attempted to contact your parents through them, but they told me that they don't have any communications with them. Would you like to call anyone?" "No," Izuku replied. "My mom's always busy with work, so I try not to bother her." The lie rolled smoothly off his tongue, something he has said to anyone who cared enough to ask. The lie is bitter, but so is he, and Izuku had long ago decided that this untruth was necessary. Recovery Girl clicked her tongue, her brows furrowing. "You're in the infirmary, boy. Your mother deserves to be able to acknowledge that and haul but to see you." He gave her a practice smile, one he knew to appear genuine enough to ward off comments. "She's out on business. She doesn't deserve to know shit." Slowly, the woman nodded. "A parent should be around for their child," she told him firmly, then turned to pin All Might with a stare. "You have 5 minutes before he's officially allowed to leave." Once she left, Izuku surveyed the hero before him, unsure of what he hoped to accomplish by turning up here. His gaunt form still towered over Izuku, the distance between them permitting Izuku to examine him. He looked worse, he noted, concern addling any spite he could muster. The skin of his face stretched across his angular bones, a sign of him not eating enough. Without a stomach, Izuku imagined that such a task would be odd to fulfill. "What do you want?" he inquired in a small, yet harsh, voice. The hero shifted, somewhat startled by his words. Just as Izuku had been scrutinizing the hero, All Might returned the action, searching him for something as well. The electric blue of his eyes rose within his dark scara to meet Izuku's steady forest green. Whatever he found in his gaze as they stared at one another, whatever the hero caught sight of gazing into the windows of his soul, it left him unsettled. Subtly, the man's demeanor changed, his shoulders dropping for a millisecond before going back. "I came to apologize for what I told you." The energy around him shifted, the anxiousness of it melting into something encouraging. "I'm glad that you chose to pave your own way as a hero instead of listening to my words." Irritation spiked at the smile the man offered him. The kind words felt like a slight, no matter the sincerity Izuku saw. People could be sincere about all the wrong things, and All Might was wrong to think his earnest apology would be fully accepted. "I'm glad I didn't listen to a lot of people in my life," Izuku said, the sentence harsh on his tongue. Kaken's words haunted him now, as they did when sleep evaded him. Every insult and threat. His suggestion, "Have a good day, sir." The hero took the dismissal with barely hidden disappointment and a deep bow. As the door closed softly behind the number 1 hero, something nagged at him. Their interaction, as tension-filled and awkward as it had been, left him expectant. All Might had been psyching himself out, Izuku had seen it in his body language. Whatever he decided not to say to Izuku felt important. Like a mischance. "Tashinori, you idiot. You DMN fool." He was not sure if the insults were his own or if it was the echoes of Gran Torino berating him for his transgressions. Midoriya Izuku had changed since their last meeting. He was stronger, bolder, bitter. The hero worship, the stars in his eyes when he looked upon All Might, they were gone. He could not begrudge the boy, not when it was his fault that the boy lost faith in him. He worried for him, the scars on his body the result of something gruesome and extensive. His left arm bore gnarled, thick scars scaling from the back of his hand to just under the top of his shoulder. Long-healed, yet flushed pink, a gruesome mark that would never fade. Disturbingly, it reminded Toshinori of the permanent scar in his side. Other, smaller, blemishes were dispersed across his exposed torso, though these were well healed and faded with age. He wondered if the boy had all of them when they met, tucked away under his school uniform where no one would see them. The boy's changes showed in his broadened shoulders, his gained muscles making him stocky. Toshinori thought that he could perhaps take one for all now, once he healed, but quickly pushed the thought aside. That was not enough. Midoriya certainly was, but Toshinori knew that when he needed his hero, he had failed miserably. Midoriya once gazed upon him like he hung the stars and moon, asking him a question he had asked others. I'm glad I didn't listen to a lot of people in my life. Instead of being among the apparent few to believe in him, Toshinori had been an addition to the list of those who dismissed him and his dreams. Toshinori had not been enough, and now he would pay the price. Chio smiled to herself as she listened to the rambunctious trio of Hatsum's dote and worry about Midoriya as they shoved a shirt on him. Her amusement dampened as she glanced back at his file. The scar on his arm was several years old, perhaps 6 or 7, but the file she held told no stories. None to explain the scar, none to even tell her about checkups. An empty medical file did not sit well with Chio, not when that scar had to have been tended to professionally to heal as excellently to allow the boy the kind of mobility he displayed when using his arm. The boy didn't mention them or pick at them. In fact, the only indication he gave of knowing they were even there was the light caress of his thumb over the disfigured skin on his left hand while he waited for the Hatsums to arrive. Chio wondered, curiosity burning, but she remained silent. She could wring the story from him at a later date, when he was officially her student to care for. But in the meantime, she would stare at the barren file in disdain. He should feel elated, Izuku supposed, as he sat alone on his bed. His dreams were being put in motion. All might apologize to him, believed in him. But the silence around him weighed on his shoulders, dragging his head down into his hands. Damp droplet-shaped circles grew on his pajama pants, prickles creeping up his body. The army figure in his palm bit into his flesh, carrying his thoughts back to the days before the apartment became so suffocating. The days when he wandered through streets and busy roads, dizzy with hunger when the food ran out and his mother had not returned. His searching led him to the place he now knew as Dagoba Beach. Finding a whole beach of metal and trash caught his delirious interest enough for him to stumble down the stairs. He walked along the paths carved in the trash until it all parted for a glorious view of the water sparkling with the light of the sun. His mom used to indulge them both with fantasies about what they would do on a beach together, where his dad wouldn't follow them. The two of them would swim and play in the sand, enjoying the cool waters and the warm sun. She would gush over the view and the shells, the possibility of finding something decorative and lustrous to bring home and remember the vacation. Izuku looked back at the piles of rubble, several pieces glaring at him brightly. Inside a few of the piles, shined metallic treasures, things Izuku thought his mom might like. Maybe if he grabbed one for her she would come back. Her voice squealed happily in his head, her green eyes alight with glee as she scooped him up from the sand and told him she would never leave him alone again. Before he knew it, Izuku was reaching his arm into the pile of trash, desperate, short fingers grasping for something inside the pile even as things sliced into his skin. Wrapping his hand around something, he let out a sob of pain and tugged on it, trying to dislodge the treasure so that he could bring it back to their apartment. When it stayed put, he yanked at it until something gave, not caring that his arm and hand were being cut to ribbons by his harsh movements. The space where his arm was collapsed, a scream ripping from his throat as metal and alike pierced his skin and crushed his bones. He cried out, tugging and tugging at his arm in an agonizing attempt to release it. "Mom! Help me!" He shouted desperately, agony shooting up his arm as he moved. "I'm sorry. I won't ever use my quirk again, I promise. Mom." But she was not the one who came. A man made of purple mist appeared in the clearing, his suit far too immaculate for the part of town they were in. His glowing eyes observed Izuku impassively as he wailed for help. "What is your quirk?" he inquired, ignoring the child's pleas and crying. Why would you not use it? Mom says it's bad, Izuku tried to force out. His vision clouded with spots, the blood pooling at his feet staining the sand. Mom says I'm evil, but if I could just give her the shiny thing, maybe she would love me again. The man stepped forward, nodding to himself. I do not have a habit of taking children off the street, but he may have use for your quirk. Or you. He added after a slight pause. Izuku could barely register what he spoke, much less begin to process them, but suddenly he was falling, the pressure crushing his arm alleviated as he descended. The impact of crashing into something solid racked him with pain, his body spasming before he mercifully passed out. Kurogyri. Master. You've brought a half-dead child into the base. He's going to bleed on the carpet. Resisting the urge to cringe, Kurogyri retained his indifferent stare and gestured to the child's prone form. I suspect you may have an interest in his quirk, sir. If you wish it, I will dispose of him at once. His quirk, you say? Master extended his reach, one of his many quirks sinking into the boy. He froze momentarily, then hummed in intrigue. Call the doctor. Tell him to keep the boy alive. The vagueness of the request, a request for the doctor, did not bode well. With the boy gone and the groceries put away, he shoved away the impulse to tug at his metal collar. To the doctor, many things meant alive. Izuku peeked through the ajar door, cautious to keep his presence unknown. Hisashi, please, Mom begged, holding her hands up, palms out in defense. I promise. Promise what? He growled, smoke pouring from his mouth as his throat flared with light. Mom cringed at the wave of heat he sent off when he exhaled. That brat of yours doesn't have a quirk like either of ours, Inko. What am I supposed to think? Please. I don't know what BS you thought was better than me. Advancing, he trapped her against the wall. But I can assure you that I'm not nearly as replaceable as you are. So tell me, who was it? Mom shook her head rapidly, tears dropping onto their floor. And no one, she sobbed. He slammed his fist into the wall, drawing a frightened yelp from her. Who is his father? He roared, heat singing her skin. I won't ask you again. He's yours. She insisted. Ichisashi, I promise he's yours. I had no part in making that demon. His throat glowed with pent-up rage, an inferno waiting to be unleashed. And I want no part of this family either. Eat, she called through her coughs. Mom batted at the smoke with her hands, stepping to follow his retreating figure. Don't leave. Don't leave. Izuku latched onto her pant leg, his tiny body curling around it as much as he could manage. I can't take you with me, you're old enough to take care of yourself, aren't you? She said through gritted teeth, thrashing her leg around. Mom's stressed out and she needs to relax, okay? I need to have fun. I'm fun. He cried. I can help you relax. Please don't leave me again. You're a child, Izuku. She stuck her hand out and pulled on him, using her quirk to pry him off of her. A problem. He left because of you. You and your dmed, evil quirk. Let go of me before you accidentally use it on me. Instantly, he released her, staring at her with fright in his wide, teary eyes. I'm sorry, he babbled. Please stay, you can dash. I'm sick of All Might reruns, she snarled. The key jingled in her hands. There's food in the fridge. And wear your gloves. The door slammed shut before he could chase after her. Hey, wake up. Darkness surrounded him fully, the only thing noticeable in the void of sensation being the incessant poking on his cheek. Get up, I want to know if you're any good at video games. Blinking awake, he groaned. The ceiling spun above him, pins and needles prodding at the nerves in his limbs as a knife slashed at his brain. The finger kept poking him. Get up, get up, get up, get dash. No, he whined, drawing out the vowel, turning his head away from the voice and its poking. Someone giggled and poked him harder. Up. The jabbing ceased and the voice let out an exaggerated groan. I'm bored. Kurogyri hasn't done anything this interesting since I've known him, and Sensei let you stay, so you have to be special. Fully realizing that someone was talking to him, talking about people he didn't know, Izuku's eyes snapped open, a gasp escaping his throat. "Where am I?" he wheezed in one short breath. "Who are you talking about?" As if it was tired of being ignored, pain flared in his left arm. The arm that was crushed under a mound of metal. Tears rose to his eyes as they darted down to the bright white cast encasing his entire arm. He couldn't see any part of his arm from the top of his shoulder to the ends of his hands. No mobility was granted by the thick, heavy cast, and he wondered if his arm was even in there or not, or if he would even still be able to use it. "Oi, calm down." Whipping his head back to the sound of the now uncomfortable voice, he found himself staring at a young boy. His pale blue hair appeared gray as it drooped around his face. His red eyes shifted around the room as he squirmed in the chair. "You're at the base. And Kurogyri is the buskill that brought you here." "Brought me? Purple mist. Yellow eyes. Tailored suit. You wear gloves too." The boy continued, an edge of contained excitement bleeding into his rasping tone. "I'm Shigaraki Tamura. And Midoriya Izuku." The small room that encased them was simple. The bed was in the corner with a bedside table and an empty desk sat at the other end of the room. The chair was absent, but Izuku suspected that it was under the boy. "Kurogyri says you don't know what your quirk is." He squinted down at him with mild distaste. "That's pretty lame. Mine is called Decay and it's really cool." He shrunk under the boy's scrutinizing stare but perked up at the mention of his quirk. "What does it do?" Shigaraki faltered, glancing at the door, but whatever crossed his face vanished to make room for the proud expression that he put onto his face. "I can disintegrate things." Again he looked away, this time at his gloved hands. "Want to see?" A tug pulled at the edges of his awareness, drawing him to Shigaraki. It reminded him of the sensation he felt when his mom yelled at him. Ignoring the feeling, Izuku nodded, wincing at how the action irritated the birds pecking at his brain. Shigaraki quickly took off one of his gloves and shuffled around the room for a minute, coming back with a small figurine in his hands. It was a hero Izuku couldn't remember the name of. "I don't really like this one, so I think it's okay for me to get rid of it," he mumbled to himself. Izuku gasped in amazement, observing with rapt attention as the figurine turned to dust before his eyes under the five-fingered touch of Shigaraki. "That's so cool!" He practically burst, struggling to sit up and fully witness the other boy's quirk. The resulting throb echoed throughout his entire body, causing any strength he mustered to disappear. Shigaraki scooted his chair closer to the bed, peering over Izuku as he panted. "Kurogyri said your arm is really messed up. Do you want to sign my cast?" he asked shakily. Messy, uncollected vision of other kids' signed casts swirled through his head. "Why would I sign your cast?" Shigaraki asked, frowning in confusion. Because that's what friends do." Shigaraki froze and Izuku's brain had the decency to make him aware of his assumption. "Friends?" He tested, the twist of his lips lifting into a half-smile. "You can only be my friend if you aren't some NPC. Player too?" Izuku suggested hopefully. Before he could answer, the door opened and Kurogyri strode inside. "Boys?" he addressed with his distorted voice. "What were you discussing?" "Midoriya wanted me to sign his cast," Shigaraki said smugly. "He's going to be my player too." Completely sidestepping Shigaraki's other words, his glowing gaze shifted to the heavy cast encasing his arm. "Ah, the arm. How is it?" It's okay," Izuku said shakily. Stranger danger rang through his mind like a blaring alarm now that his mind wasn't muddled by pain. "The doctor says that he ensured you would be able to use your arm, if you are concerned." Again, that feeling picked at his senses, this time drawing him to Kurogyri. This time it was different somehow. Icy instead of weighted like Shigaraki's. Assurance that he would still have his arm when the cast came off flooded him with relief. "Do you want to sign my cast too, Mr. Kurogyri?" he offered, trying to think of some way to properly thank him for helping him. "Kurogyri is fine, Midoriya." He paused. "And I will find a marker." As soon as Kurogyri left the room, Shigaraki shot Izuku a withering glare. "I thought that friends were supposed to sign casts," he grumbled. "Kurogyri saved me, Shiga dash," he huffed, not happy to stumble over syllables. Kurojiri brought me here, Riki. I need to thank him. Riki? He repeated incredulously. Friends give each other nicknames, Izuku explained, attempting to cover his stutter. He frowned but accepted the excuse, leaning back into the chair. Should I give you one? Deku, snarled Kaken's voice. Sure. Midoriya, he pronounced slowly. Mido. Ria. Mi-ri. Friends can also call each other by their G-given names, Izuku said nervously. Izuku, he stated calmly, making him flush pink. He hadn't heard his name uttered with anything other than hate in weeks, not since his father left. Aizu. Zuzu. Kuzu. He mumbled with indecision. What if I put them together? Midoku. Ridoku. Mizu. Zumi. Was it possible to die from excessive blushing? At this point, Izuku felt confident that the answer was yes. Why are you so red? I don't think I've ever seen someone this shade of color before. Should I call for Kurojiri? He made a sound of mortification from the back of his throat, raising his free arm to cover his face. You're weird. Shigaraki decided. The two names that stood starkly against his pale cast, and every time he looked at them a whole rush of endorphins flooded his systems. He wasn't sure how Mist even wrote with a marker, but Kurojiri's handwriting stretched neatly along a small expanse of space on the cast. Shigaraki followed a different train of thought, printing a giant scrawl of Riki in large, childish writing. You can't play video games with one hand, Shigaraki thought aloud. But Sensei hasn't come to get me yet, so I can show you what to do. Izuku cheered, shimmying in place to make room on the bed for his friend. Kurojiri had been really nice to Izuku, helping him sit up. He didn't yell at him once. Shigaraki was kind, too, in his own way. He let Izuku cling to his arm, albeit with doses of reluctance that seemed to shrink each time he repeated the action. The meals Kurojiri brought them were the best ones he had ever consumed, his starved stomach agreeing with him. Wholeheartedly. Sensei has finished examining your quirk, Kurojiri said as he entered the room. Izuku flinched at the mention of his quirk, snuggling closer to Shigaraki for comfort. He would like to test it once your arm is healed. His mother's cutting voice made him shake his head fervently before he realized it. No, it's bad. Mom says it's bad, he insisted, hiding his face behind his right arm. It's not, Kurojiri stated plainly. But it made everyone go away, he blubbered, full-on sobbing now. I don't want you to go away. It's just some stupid quirk, Shigaraki interrupted. If Sensei didn't like it, you'd already be gone. Indeed. We will not go away once we know more about your quirk. Promise. Promise. There was no way for Izuku to tell how long he had been in the base. Because of his arm, he hadn't left the bed for much other than to relieve himself. Shigaraki left for a few hours during each day and Kurojiri tutored Izuku on his subjects while it was just the two of them. Izuku thought it odd that Kurojiri taught him how to properly hold certain knives or pay bills, but didn't question his teacher. Teachers never liked him before, but Kurojiri verbally expressed how much easier it was to handle Izuku compared to Shigaraki, much to the others' disdain. When he woke up one day, the cast was gone. Like the first time he woke up, sharp pains prodded beneath his skin and his eyes trailed the ceiling sluggishly. Even the jarring realization that the weight he had been working around simply vanished couldn't pierce through the fog that descended upon his brain. In place of the cast, slash after notch after jab of scar tissue sat obviously on his skin. He tried to move his fingers, nearly sobbing when they responded immediately, even if the movements were trembling. Once his head cleared, he bounced around the room, waiting for his friends to come back so that he could show them his arm. It looked spindly and thin from disuse, but Izuku could see it, and that was more than enough for him. Kurojiri, he squealed when the man opened the door. Kurojiri, look my arm. He chuckled. Yes, Midoriya, I see. Do you know where my cast went? Unbeknownst to the inquisitive child, the man stiffened, his aura darkening. I didn't see anyone take it off. Do not concern yourself with such things, Kurojiri said. But you and Riki signed it, Izuku pouted, puffing up his cheeks. He peered down at him curiously. What does that matter? he asked. It's a symbol of our friendship, Izuku continued, spiraling into tears. See, can I please keep it? Hesitantly, Kurogyari answered. I'm afraid it has already been disposed of, Midoriya. He glanced up at the room, bypassing the crying boy to pick up a small figurine. Midoriya, hold out your hand. Holding out his right hand, Izuku sniffled. His teacher pressed the figurine into his hand. This is yours now. Tamura and I want you to have this. Do you accept our gift? Nodding rapidly, Izuku's breath hitched with renewed bawling. Weiss, he stuttered, holding the small object close to his chest. Would you like to know what your quirk is? The sudden change in topic jarred Izuku, but he nodded meekly. Tamura-sensei has deduced that upon touching someone, you can put them into a battle with themselves. He says that according to his analysis quirk, yours pits a person against their insecurities. Izuku tilted his head in incomprehension. Kurogyari sighed deeply. Your quirk makes people be rude to themselves. He said simply. Before Izuku could start wailing again, he shushed him. This is a very good quirk, Izuku. When you learn to control it, you will be a very powerful asset to Tamura. You want to please him, don't you? Why, yeah. And I believe that as you develop we will find new facets within your quirk as you grow. I doubt that any emitter quirk in the current times is as simple as the user thinks they are. He allowed Izuku to ramble about the varied uses of an old hero's brief shock emission quirk, both of them grateful for a more pleasant change in topic. Later in the day during his time with Shigaraki, he rolled around on the bed, relishing his newfound ability to move so easily. Riki, I thought you said this one was easy, Izuku groaned, sinking into Shigaraki's side. Shigaraki grunted in displeasure but didn't push him off. It is easy, Izuku, Shigaraki insisted. You're just terrible at playing video games. Shigaraki's casual use of his given names still made him blush. He doubted that anything his friend called him other than Midoriya would have made him a stuttering mess, but at least he was beginning to become used to his name being spoken with fondness. Izuku watched Shigaraki defeat a mini-boss with ease and finesse that he did not understand, but he smiled up at Shigaraki anyway. I think you're just amazing at this, Riki, and I'm a beginner. Shigaraki's cheeks lit up with pink and he shoved Izuku away, causing the latter to laugh and push himself up to look his friend in the eyes and say, I think you're wonderful, Riki. And as he did every time without fail, Shigaraki's face went beet red and he scowled at Izuku as he latched onto his side. Izuku had a feeling neither of them got hugged much, so he hugged Shigaraki a lot. Once he figured out what kind of reaction Shigaraki had when given an honest compliment, he drowned the kid in them. The swift change in Izuku's everyday life left him reeling, but he wouldn't change it for the world. It was nice to have a friend who didn't insult him or use their quirk to hurt him. It was nice to have warm meals and talk with people who didn't hate him. Shigaraki and Kurogyari were weird, but Izuku was too, so he didn't care. Shigaraki was his friend and he treated Izuku with the kindness he figured a friend should. Kurogyari taught him interesting things and hadn't snapped at him once. But nothing so brilliant as this new life could last. The light in the room turned on without warning and Kurogyari's usually gentle touch harshly dragged him out of his bed. Midoriya, get dressed. He commanded. That thing pulled at his brain, directing him to Kurogyari, so Izuku barely hesitated to listen. Kurogyari walked out the door, gesturing for Izuku to follow, and he balked. He whispered. Even with his healed arm, he stayed in the room, doing small exercises with his arm and continuing their usual schedule. We're going outside? He left the question unacknowledged, instead saying, Tamura's waiting. Izuku scrambled after him, latching onto Kurogyari's nearest. When he glanced down, Izuku huddled closer, frightened by the unfamiliar setting. His teacher allowed the contact, not making a comment. His mood lifted slightly at the sight of Shigaraki, but he refused to meet his eyes. Scanning the room, he found a man, lithe and pale, squirming in a chair. He thrashed fruitlessly against his bindings, a GG muffling his pleas, and a BLNDFLD obstructing his vision. Izuku could still decipher his words, though. The strange feeling got stronger, filling the room. Use your quirk on him, Kurogyari ordered, using a voice Izuku had never heard before. Izuku whipped around, his scarred arm twinging at the sudden movement. Kurojire's eyes narrowed and Izuku took a step back. "No dash. Do it." Kurojire had never looked at him like that before. He threw his gaze to Shigaraki, pleading for some assistance, but he avoided his eyes once more. The man was kneeling, his exposed chest sallow and cold with sweat when Izuku raised a hand to his chest. Nothing happened. "Curious," Kurojire muttered, then doubled back to this new persona and shot him a scathing glare. "Use your quirk now." Something in his chest lifted, an unknown weight dissolving as Izuku tried for them, and the man froze. Shoving down his horror, he stayed put. The pain in his head built steadily, impossible to ignore. "Kurojire, something's wrong dash." He grabbed Izuku's arm and pressed his hand back into the man's chest. "Keep dash." He froze, falling victim to his quirk, and Izuku let out a sob of apology to both of them. "I'm sorry," he breathed on repeat as everything became too much at once. Izuku stumbled back, wrenching himself away from both of them, and fell to the ground. He stayed on the ground, curling into himself and breathing hard against the knives digging into his brain. Voices called to him and hands pulled him off the ground, but Izuku didn't want to hear any of it. Something was coming out of his nose. Something in his mouth tasted funny. He gave in to the darkness beckoning to him, gladly accepting the escape. If Tamura were asked, he would refute it and refuse to give any sort of a straight answer, but he felt happy when Izuku was with him. His kind touch sated whatever beast inside him hungered to destroy. His warmth radiated from his body and Tamura basked in the affection he offered so easily. The boy didn't balk at his rude tone of voice or fear him and his quirk. Izuku was an uncharted degree of good, and Tamura had only begun to navigate it. Tamura noticed that Izuku didn't like having his skin covered, not as he did. Izuku liked short sleeves and bright colors, a contrast to Tamura's preferences. Their skin brushed occasionally, but he never went still like Kurojire. He never touched Izuku and caused him pain. Kurojire hadn't touched his hands, and yet he was subjected to Izuku's quirk. Apparently, his quirk behaved differently from his own, not requiring 5 fingers to be activated. Originally, Izuku's outright refusal to use his quirk made him resist the urge to roll his eyes, but as he watched Izuku's expression twist with pain, the harder it became for him to stay put. Kurojire straightened beside Izuku's bedside, his experienced hands ensuring that his friend was safe. Alive. He will not want Midoriya around anymore. You realize this? Tamura understood. He knew that Sensei would have no use for a quirk that damaged its holders so dreadfully, even if the power garnered a certain amount of appeal. That meant Izuku had no use. He watched absently as Izuku fell through Kurojire's portal, willing himself not to cry. Don't cry. But alone in his room, the silence consumed him with taunting echoes of his friend's laughter. He shivered without the heat of Izuku's body beside him and finally allowed the dam to break. Curled into himself, muffling his cries with his pillow, Tamura mourned everything he gained and lost in such a short amount of time. He cried at the loss of those hands messing with his hair and the compliments he would not hear for simply being. He longed for his friend to come back. Please come back. But Sensei would not allow it. Kurojire already sent him off at his orders, and Sensei's orders were irrefutable. During his next training session, Tamura disintegrated half the room, infuriated at himself. At Kurojire. Sensei. The amount of rage he felt was unprecedented, and this time, Izuku was not present to calm him down. Sand blew through the tips of his fingers, chasing after the wind only to fall back a little further from where it started. Izuku thought it was like him. He chased Tamura and fell, gaining something, but not being able to move any further. Izuku sat alone on Dagoba Beach, surrounded by trash, scars racing up his left arm to forever remind him of his time with them. He didn't want to find his way back to an empty apartment. He didn't want to think about how no one would comment on his absence because he had no one. Liars, his mind hissed in fury as he bawled. Liars. They said they would stay. They said they would stay. Promise. He screamed at the betrayal, his voice as wrecked and unstable as he felt. Izuku cried for his friend, his tears landing silently in the sand as the sun set. He cried for those small smiles and blushing faces and loud cheers when he won a game. He longed to catch one more glimpse of the warmth of those ruby-red eyes that were always so relaxed around him. Izuku knew why he was thrown away, tossed out of their lives like he had never been there to begin with. It was his quirk. His stupid, evil quirk. The odd feeling disappeared. Izuku blinked and found himself in his room. He ran his hand over the scars and fought off the tears streaming down his face. He barely covered them up, but he made it a point to never mention them. No one asked either. Mei and her moms knew he'd gotten it at Dagoba, but nothing else. They did not know about his quirk either. He refused to put their relationship with him to chance. In middle school, it hadn't been the trickiest thing to cover them up. The uniforms did the job well enough, and no one ever saw him out of them besides the Hatsums. Izuku curled up on his bed and stared at the figurine on his nightstand. It was one of a soldier, not a hero, and tiny enough to have fit in Izuku's pocket. It was the only thing he had from that weird hideout. The only physical thing aside from his scars to remind Izuku of how exactly he knew about his quirk's abilities. Questions about Tamura and Kurogiri rolled around in his head, but he knew they would be left unanswered. The thing inside his chest, the Dmed quirk, writhed in remembrance of its own use, begging to be let out. Izuku imagined himself adding another weight onto the locked box. He crammed it in. When Izuku imagined receiving his letter from UA after taking their exams, he pictured himself in the apartment, alone and anxious for either a confirmation or the damnation of his aspirations. But this was so much different than he could have imagined. Mitsu put her hands together, her golden eyes positively glowing with pride, as she stared at the unsealed envelopes. Ayumi vibrated in her seat as she smiled, showing off her sharper-than-normal teeth. "I'm so dash." A smile broke out across her face, tears making her eyes shine. "God, how the hell did we end up with two amazing children?" "What she means," Ayumi signed, pausing to wipe away her own tears, "is that we could not be more proud of you two. We're going to brag about this for the rest of our FFING lives." Mitsu sobbed. "Our coworkers are going to tell us to shut the hell up, and I'm going to shove pictures of you in their FING faces." She leaned against Ayumi's shoulder, sniffling and rubbing at her eyes. Not that Izuku could really judge. He had, after all, been crying since the hologram of All Might told him he managed to not only pass, but earn the top spot. Mei latched onto him after they all met in the living room, the two of them bursting at the seams with exhilaration, and hadn't released him since their initial collision. "Did either of you call our grandparents?" Izuku realized, a moment later, that he was being included in the hour. Mitsu called him their kid. He supposed that this was hardly the first time, but it stunned him how easily they included him in their family. "No," Mista gasped, jolting upright and throwing herself off the couch. "Sheet F," she cursed as she narrowly avoided crashing into a wall. "Dad, get ma, Ayumi and I are raising the pride of this family." He blushed at the words, sinking further into Mei's embrace. A voice garbled by distance and technology reached their ears, saying something that made Mitsu laugh as she re-entered the living room with her phone. "Dad, I'm talking about our kids, not the robot that may exploded in your garage." The man on the other line laughed, then paused. "Kids?" he asked. The ensuing video call left him in a goopy puddle of mush, all the endearing introductions and acceptance jarring him. Apparently he had grandparents now, which was FENG wild considering he had no parents 9 months ago. Mei giggled, squeezing him with the arms she wrapped around his shoulders. "Shut up, Mimi," he muttered, only succeeding in causing her giggles to intensify. Why couldn't he have a cloaking quirk instead of some dumbass empath quirk? The door's enormity was its own brand of intimidation because apparently everything in this school needed to be ginormous. He wondered if there had been a past student with a mutation quirk that made them rebuild the entrances to accommodate them, or if it truly was an intimidation tactic. If his tuition was going to giant robots and large doors, then he had some choice words for whoever makes those decisions. He pushed the door open and thought about simply shutting it again when the sound of Bakugo's aggravated voice reached his ears. And he wanted to say thanks to whatever deity was getting a kick out of his suffering, the loud kid who called him out at the exams. Instead of doing the desired action and calmly retracting himself from the situation, Izuku sighed in defeat and slinked into the room. No one glanced at him, too involved in their own conversations to notice Izuku silently passed the threshold. Until someone practically popped into existence in front of him, the smile on her face bright, and pointed her hand at his chest. "It's you, from the practical exams," she said excitedly, breaking the cover of chatter Izuku had planned to use as his shield. People's conversations paused at her shout, their eyes flicking over to them. "I wanted to say thanks, you really saved me out there." "Oh, hey," another student shouted, coming over to them. It was the tailed boy he helped out from under some fallen robots. "You saved me too, thanks." A large figure stopped behind the blonde with a tail. "I carried you out, you all right now?" Izuku opened his mouth to stutter some response out to make them back off, but a hand chopped in front of his face. Standing taller than Izuku by a margin was the boy with the glasses, his back stiff and straight as he held out his hand. "Your performance during the practical exam was very becoming of a hero. Maybe if I just pretend I don't know what these people are talking about, they'll leave me alone. You didn't hesitate to help, even when the challenge of taking down a zero-pointer was in front of you." "Oh god damn it." Izuku held in a sigh of mortification as the room erupted with disbelief. "You took down a zero-pointer?" A pink girl with horns cried in alarm. "That's so manly, dude." A red-haired boy exclaimed, stepping closer. "How'd you do it? Those things were huge." The room's enthusiastic interrogation halted, suspense filling the air as his classmates turned to him for a response. Izuku blinked, the expectant silence of all classmates a far throw from the clamor they created. "Support items." He deadpanned, giving them a thumbs up and feeling so effing awkward. "They're great. If you're all here to talk, you should leave." Izuku jumped, bumping into the red-haired boy with sharp teeth when he took a step away from the door and saw a raggedy man on his side in a yellow sleeping bag. "Welcome to UA's hero course." He stood and unzipped the sleeping bag, eyeing the students with a blank, tired expression. "It took 8 seconds for you all to shut up. That's not going to work. Rational students know how precious time is." With the sight of him standing at his full height, his capture weapon and hair on display, Izuku wondered if this was some sort of dream. "Eraserhead?" he muttered so softly in marvelment he didn't think anyone would have heard him. "But oh god." "OF." Eraserhead glanced down at him, his expression shifting ever so slightly from the bored mask he wore. Izuku could honestly feel his death. Yup, this was how it happened. Death by eye contact. "Hello, I'm Aizawa Shoyuta, your teacher." His eyes strayed from Izuku, slowly taking in the mass of students that accumulated behind him. Ignoring whatever reason you're all crowding the door, he pulled out UA uniforms from his sleeping bag. "Put these on and go outside." On the way to the locker room, blood-red eyes burned holes into the back of his head. The other students were mingling and talking about Eraserhead's behavior. Some of them complained about missing the orientation ceremony that every other class got to sit in on. He kept the relief he felt to himself when he realized that there would be an orientation ceremony and that they would likely not attend it. Large crowds were never his forte. Bakugo pushed past him, his shoulder roughly slamming into his as they entered the locker room. Resentment pooled in his core as he remembered their last conversation. If that interaction could be called a conversation. What the hell, shitty Deku? He seethed, gripping the collar of Izuku's uniform. "I told you're useless but not to apply." Izuku only glared up at him, meeting that once friendly ruby gaze, without flinching. "I don't care what you tell me to do," he said steadily, holding his burning stare even when Kaken's other hand popped in warning. "I'm going to UA, Kaken, and if any student or teacher is worth their salt, I'm not certain they'll tolerate you beating up another student." His ears rang at the too-close blast, half his vision on one side blacked out from the flash of light. The skin of the side of his face hurt. Kaken growled. "You worthless dash." Izuku grabbed the arm pinning him to the wall. "I am not worthless," he snarled. Kaken's grip loosened, shock widening his narrowed eyes. "Stop if you saying that. I worked hard and fought for my spot at UA, so don't you dare say I can't go." He opened his mouth, lip curled and poised to beat him into the ground like he had done for years. But this time, Izuku slid his hand onto the bare flesh of Kaken's hand, watching as he froze until his touch. His skin crawled with unease, the sensation of utter weightlessness. He felt almost enough to distract him from the buzzing pain mounding in his skull. Slipping from his lax hold, Izuku made to bolt, but Kaken recovered faster than the rest of them ever had. The contact must have been too short compared to the others to put him in a daze. He bit down on his own relief because that meant Kaken had not been hurt like the rest of them. Was that Deku? He raged, flying at Izuku as he reached the mouth of the alcove. You think you can use your quirk on me? Izuku stopped, swiveling around to face him. His eyes burned with fury, the faded scars on his body tingling. His cheek throbbed with the recent burn. If you think you have any room to talk like that, then you're more of a dumbass than I pegged you for. Catching the right hook, he slammed Kaken into a brick wall. His hands popped with bursts of his quirk, but Izuku moved his knee into his gut, not daring to allow him any time to recover. Kaken heaved on the ground, giving him the chance to turn tail and dash away. His headache didn't last long. Halfway through changing, a pair of eyes settled on him, making him shove down the urge to let his eyes drift to the source of the pressure on his neck. The room's noise lessened enough for his eyes to finally snap up. Staring he had dealt with. Humiliation, a common occurrence. But that had been middle school. This was high school, and he'd be dead if he allowed himself to be gawked at like some zoo creature for them. With that deliberation, he met the sharp-toothed boy's red eyes, one so unique from the already contrasting gazes. Izuku almost startled visibly. Concern furrowed his classmate's brows, his mouth pulling into a slight frown. His eyes lifted from Izuku's scarred arm when he finished dressing, finally meeting his own. Dude, those are some gnarly scars you have on your arm. He refused to flinch at the comment. He refused to be reduced to his scars in front of his classmates. He wondered if Bakugo was one of the several gazes glued to his left arm and longed for Mei's hand clasped strongly around his own, for Mitsu's arm weighing reassuringly on his shoulders, for Yumi's shadow cast over him as she stood taller than all of them and warded off the stares. When Izuku first told them that he acquired his scars from an unstable pile in Dagoba Beach, they all reacted in their own ways. Mei immediately drop-kicked the piece of scrap metal she had been inspecting, dusting her hands off, and sat down next to Izuku without saying a word. Ayumi's ear fins flared in surprise and she broke the metal water bottle she had been holding, the metal molding to accommodate to the shape of her curled palm. Mitsu's face drained of color, anything expressive in her features dropping. The fact that they were physically present at Dagoba Beach didn't help in the slightest. The confession made them back off on their questions concerning his past for a few days. He was expressly forbidden from going anywhere near Dagoba Beach during that time, and though they couldn't enforce the decree, he obeyed and waited for a chance to explain that he was fine now and knew how to be cautious. Staring into the red-haired boy's eyes, he wondered why people think his scars were their business. It wasn't a shared wound. Hero students, no, people should know how rude it is to call attention to and recklessly point out something that someone can't fix like they need to do something about it. Izuku knew that his scars were gnarled and ugly, but that didn't mean other people could say that. Yup, Izuku said snappishly, breezing past them all. He was not ashamed of his scars. Scars told stories, tales that strangers had no right to ask him about. No one could force him to hide his memories away, and for better or worse, Izuku wanted to remember his time with Tamura and Kurogiri. That was fast. The gruff voice forced him from his thoughts. Izuku blinked and felt the sun warming his side. He was outside now. With his teacher. The teacher, who happened to be the pro-hero Eraserhead. Most students take their time, make a friend or two. His eyes were drawn to his arm, but they flicked back to his face in an instant, paying the marks covering his skin no mind. I saw your practical exam, he said, his face not shifting from the bored mask he wore. You cost us a giant robot. Relieved that his respect for his hero could remain intact, Izuku adopted an amused expression. It was going to run someone over, he reasoned, daring to meet his teacher's eyes. I think my actions were justified. Do you really think we would have allowed that to happen? Eraserhead regarded him carefully when Izuku hesitated to respond. Coming to a conclusion, Izuku shook his head. No, he answered. But accidents happen. Sometimes people aren't paying close enough attention, and I didn't want to take that kind of chance when she could have been maimed in an exam, of all things. After a lapse in their conversation, Eraserhead spoke again. You recognized me earlier, he prompted. His aloof demeanor quailed and melted away, heat rushing to his face as he scoured his mind for a proper answer. Yeah, you're my favorite hero, so I basically scanned and analyzed every single bit of information about you I could get a hold on. Nope. Definitely not. Why, you're a great hero, Eraserhead. Questions whizzed through his mind, his hands twitching for a pencil. I have so many questions. The sound of voices approaching called an abrupt and unfortunate end to their conversation. Class began with a bang, the threat of expulsion now hanging over all their heads, and Izuku ran his thumb over the top of his left hand, running his thumb over the grooves in his skin. He could do this. Izuku was called for the grip test and picked up the clamp that Yaoyorozu had disregarded. He ignored Ida's comments and hand-chopping, watching the digital number rise as the clamp squeezed. Midoriya, we are supposed to be making use of our own skills. Ida scolded in an affronted manner. I am, he responded dryly. Sensei hasn't said anything, has he? His classmates turned to their teacher, who shrugged. He's making use of his surroundings. Ida stiffened and apologized, the tests moving on. Yaoyorozu ended up at the top for many reasons, and Izuku couldn't wait to analyze her quirk. If she could make a motorized scooter in a minute, one that functioned as it should no less, he wondered what limitations and requirements she was bound by. His scores seemed utterly average compared to some of his classmates, but he stood in the middle of the pack, something he acknowledged with pride. Not having a physical quirk SE, but it wasn't as if he was doing terribly. The invisible girl and the short, purple-haired boy were not nearly as physically fit as him, and neither of their quirks were suited to help them aside from Mineta, who stuck himself onto someone when the chance arose. Seeing the multitude of new quirks in his class exhilarated him. If they felt comfortable talking with him about them, he would have to ask them about their quirks when the opportunity came. To everyone's immense relief, no one was kicked out on their first day. Why didn't you use your quirk to help yourself out? Uraraka poked him suddenly in the shoulder. His classmates glanced at them, likely wondering the same thing. Why isn't Hagakure using her quirk? Izuku shot back. The girl in question squeaked at the stares that were directed at her. Uraraka blinked in confusion. Not every quirk is physical. Eraserhead's stare burned into his back, reminding him what his file said about him, reminding him of the lie that he kept alive, but he let Izuku walk back into the locker room without a word. Izuku left before any of his classmates could even start switching their clothes. Alone with Eraserhead again in the classroom, he grabbed his notebook and decided that his questions for his teacher could wait while his memories of his classmates' quirks were still fresh in his mind. His leg bobbed at an increasing speed, the sound of his rapid mumbling tumbling out of his mouth lost to him as he neatly and efficiently dove into his thoughts. When his hand started to cramp, he paused and switched the dull pencil into his right hand to continue writing. Regrettably enough, Izuku knew there wouldn't be time to make an appropriate page for each of them because of the time restraints and his lack of knowledge. Some of them weren't able to demonstrate the extents of their quirks, and he was sure that each of them had more than the naked eye could see. Hagakure came to mind again as he jotted down questions concerning her refractability. As he commented, her quirk would have done nothing to help her during the practical exam. She did not appear to have enough brute force to break a robot, so perhaps her points were more dedicated to rescue points than to villain points. Or, a small, sneaky voice began, she stole villain points too. It would be in character with her quirk to be more sly than she let on. With her ability to go overlooked, it would make sense for her to learn to be more clever to make herself stand out. Movement caught his attention and every instinct in him screamed danger. The world crashed around him, and all he could think about were the stares burning into his back and the charred notebooks, his skin stinging with the phantom pain of his worst days. No. Not again. He could not remember where he was, but he sat in a classroom, and that was enough of a warning sign for him. He tried to remember the Hatsums, but they were consumed by jeering classmates and mountains of familiar terror. What should he do? What should he do? He stopped writing, the haphazard half-thoughts halting in his panic, when another hand pressed itself over his bare skin. The cage inside him burst, the lock loosened by his lapse of concentration. He scrambled to reverse his mistake, but pain descended on him like a flock of hungry vultures picking at his body, and clarity struck him, leaving nothing but the expressionless face of his teacher, who stood stock-still beside him. Shoyuta wasn't exactly sure what he expected Midoriya to act like, but he was simultaneously aligning with his assumptions and completely disregarding them at the same time. The kid was intelligent, resourceful, and possessed the foresight to build muscle mass. He moved with the dexterity of a fighter and bore the scars on his arm without shielding them. Shoyuta granted the kid a pass when he dodged Uraraka's question, his deflection enough of an answer for every other student. The boy intrigued him, to say the least. When Midoriya entered the classroom again, his quick-paced gait accompanied by jittering hands, he expected him to bombard him with the questions that he had unabashedly yearned to ask when they were outside. Midoriya ignored him completely, though. Not even sparing his teacher a glance, he plopped himself into his chair and pulled out a notebook. He watched his students steadily delve deeper into his own world as his foot tapped quietly against the desk leg, incoherent mumbles reaching his keen ears as he wrote and sketched. The nature of what could possibly absorb so much of Midoriya's concentration evaded his knowledge until he heard snippets of his students' jumbled thoughts. Hadn't he mentioned a hobby during his support gear evaluation? Analyzers in the field of quirks were severely understaffed and undermotivated. Too few could grasp quirk science because the field of study was so abused by people in the industry. Quirk analysts, especially those in support, needed to think further than what their quota would be fulfilled by, but most did not. Students trickled into the room slowly. The one named Kirishima stepped closer to Midoriya, something heavy in his gaze, and Shoyuta held up a hand and shook his head. He wanted to see how long this kid could continue for. More students came in, taking their seats and speaking, but Midoriya paid them no attention. He paused his writing for a moment, and Shoyuta wondered if that was it, but then his pencil was in his right hand and he began anew. Ambidextrous, huh? He grimly wondered if the skill had been acquired when the scars marking his skin were bandaged wounds. Shoyuta had been careful not to stare, unlike some of his students, but he allowed himself the chance to scrutinize his memory of the times during the apprehension test that he did look at his arm. The scarring was old and unirritated. Midoriya's motor skills were obviously intact. The surgical way some of the less prominent lines presented contrasted the more jagged ones, but he chalked that up to whatever medical treatment he managed to find. Bakugo, the aggravatable boy with the explosion quirk, glared at Midoriya with a burning fury of a multitude of suns the entire time they were in the same room. He stood on the edges of the group of spectators that watched Midoriya work. The bell rang and his students filed out. Midoriya didn't seem to take notice. Sighing, Shoyuta made his way over to Midoriya's desk. He didn't make it far before every bit of movement the boy had been making, the bobbing of his leg, the muttering, the darting of his eyes, all of just stopped. Except for the writing. His hand valiantly kept moving, even if the rest of him froze. Shoyuta dipped forward, trying to catch his eye, but the boy's eyes were worryingly distant. He put his hand over the still-moving one of his student, prepared to say something when everything disappeared, a sudden darkness swallowing him whole. Shoyuta wondered briefly if the coffee Nedzu forced him to drink during the faculty meeting that morning had really been terrible enough to cause him hallucinations. He wouldn't put it past the rat, but Quirk, his brain supplied, remembering Midoriya. He has a quirk. Rage simmered at the realization that this boy had lied on multiple legal documents. Why would he lie so thoroughly to avoid people knowing about his quirk? Should have expelled him. A voice hissed in his ear. His own voice. You should have seen it. You were just distracted. Midoriya, he called over the rising noise around him. No answer. In the midst of the pitch-black expanse, something began forming, a figure. It startled him to see it turn and watch his own face make some twisted combination of a grin and a snarl, words spilling from its mouth. Ripped from the world of nothing and moved back into his classroom, Shoyuta fell onto his butt, disoriented. The lights of his classroom assaulted his vision, the world spinning. Midoriya, he said hoarsely. Instead of an answer, Shoyuta heard hacking coughs, and he hauled himself upright. Facing the wall, Midoriya braced himself against the wall and coughed blood into his hand in an attempt to stop the liquid from spewing everywhere. His legs buckled and Shoyuta caught his quaking body. My Quirk dash. He didn't manage anything else before delving into another fit of wet coughs. Standing, Shoyuta burst out of his classroom and sprinted down the halls, distantly aware of the fact that he bypassed several lingering students, but he could care less when his student was coughing up as much blood as he was. Midoriya stops coughing, his body going dangerously limp, and Shoyuta bolts down the halls with renewed speed. Shouts follow him in the voice of one of his coworkers, but he ignores them, not stopping until he reached the infirmary. He barged inside and put his student down on an empty bed. Shizenji is by his bedside in a moment. What happened? What happened? Shoyuta wasn't sure if he could accurately answer that. I don't know. She cut him a sharp glare. He used his quirk. I don't know, he stressed. Quirk? She questioned. I thought he didn't have one. It had been a big deal for the UA staff when it was announced that a quirkless kid made it into the hero course. He would have been the first. I guess we know why he never used it, Shoyuta muttered darkly. Shizenji cursed loudly. Aizawa, chest compressions now. His blood turned to ice, but he obeyed the order. This was not how the year should be starting. This should not happen at any point in the year. Too much time passed, seconds and hours all at once, as he pressed down on Midoriya's chest. He pushed harder, hoping that he wasn't hurting his ribs too much, but damn it, he would rather have the boy whine about pain than not be able to feel anything at all. Please, Shoyuta begged the boy on the bed. Please just breathe. Mercy must have been given because Midoriya's body lurched up, a wet cough sending blood spewing from his mouth. Shoyuta didn't dare step away. No one could drag him from that spot because what if his student stopped breathing again? What if he died again? He wheezed for air, choking on the blood that stained Shizenji's pristine sheets. Shuta's hands, nauseatingly sticky from blood, were there before he could think, rolling Midoriya onto his side. Shizenji kissed him and he melted into the bed, every bit of his energy spent. Breathing ragged and stuttering, Midoriya gulped in every ounce of air he could manage around the liquid in his throat. He stared at nothing, then his eyes focused and flooded with tears. His hands, both of them red with his blood, rose to shield his face as he sobbed quietly. The realization dawning on Shoyuta was not a pleasant one. This has happened to him before. The notion was terrible, horrifying, but Midoriya knew what that experience had been. Shoyuta could not concern himself with anger if he tried. No wonder his parents felt they had to lie about their son's quirk. If he used it he glanced at the clock, 10 minutes haven't even gone by, that short amount of time, and he ended up dying. He shut down that particular train of thought before he lost himself in the panic. Midoriya flinched when Shizenji moved away from his side. Shoyuta did not know how she could do that, did not know how her face could be so calm when his student's blood dotted the pastel colors of her doctor's coat. Midoriya curled further into himself when Shizenji spoke, her voice soft and steady. I'm not entirely sure what caused that, but he will fall asleep soon. I'll call his dash. She stopped and hummed in annoyance. I'll call the Hatsums, I suppose. The Hatsums? He asked, his tone dangerously close to snappish. What about his parents? She sighed, glancing at Midoriya's unconscious form. His mother is the only relative he has, but the last time I spoke with him about her, he insisted that she was too busy to bother. Shuta's disdain must have been plain on his face because Shizenji made a noise of agreement. I know, but he wouldn't budge. The Hatsums are good women. He trusted them. His medical file is worryingly empty too. What? Finally, his feet unglued themselves from his previous spot, allowing him to whip around to face her. But his arm dash. I know, she interjected grimly. That kind of injury combined with his lack of disability would require extensive procedures and physical therapy. Shizenji called the Hatsums, the implications of their resident mystery student left to settle. Hello, this is Recovery Girl from UA High School. I'm calling about Midoriya Izuku. She glanced at Midoriya's file once more before tossing it aside with a roll of her eyes. At the moment, he is stable, but is there anything you could tell us regarding his quirk? The line went silent before a garbled voice said something. No, you heard me correctly. I would like any information possible on his quirk. She paused, listening to the woman talk with a pinched expression. I see. If you could make time to come to you, all right, thank you. I will tell the principal to expect you. Shizenji clicked her tongue in annoyance. No file, no way to contact his mother, no information on his quirk. And that woman didn't even allow me to explain his condition. With the time given to them, they situated Midoriya properly, hooking him up to a monitor. After pulling it to Midoriya's bedside, he sank into one of the plastic chairs provided. The door banged open and Hisashi burst inside, huffing and disheveled. Shoyuta, he gasped, his shoulders sagging in relief. Hisashi, he greeted monotonically, all his energy drained away with his adrenaline. There was blood, he explained, jerking his thumb to the general area outside of the infirmary. There's a lot of blood in your classroom, Sho. His eyes gradually drifted to Midoriya and widened behind his tinted glasses. He rushed to the other side of Midoriya's bed. What happened? He asked, scanning his prone body for injuries. Shoyuta explained the situation, Shizenji intervening where he wavered, and Hisashi returned his stare to Midoriya with shock coloring his features. His quirk killed him? He whispered, rightly horrified. That is the unfortunate conclusion, Shizenji replied solemnly. And his emergency contacts, who are not his parents, are on the way? Yes. Shoyuta rubbed his head to stave off the oncoming migraine. Something is wrong here, but we need more information, something this boy seems to be particularly skilled in hiding. Hisashi set his jaw, eyes sharpening. I'll inform Nedzu. Mei scanned the cafeteria, her golden eyes snagging on the bunch of hero students spilling into the lunchroom. She zipped over excitedly, wondering if Izuku was inadvertently hiding behind one of his classmates' broad-shouldered backs. They appeared perturbed by her sudden emergence at their sides, but she focused on examining the crowd. A frown pulled at the corners of her lips when she realized he was missing from his class. You. She grabbed the shoulder of a blond boy with a black streak in his hair. Where's Midoriya Izuku? We aren't sure, answered a tall girl with a large ponytail. We haven't seen Midoriya since our homeroom. Scenarios flitted uselessly through her mind and she shoved them all aside. Not one of you has seen him? They shook their heads and her worry skyrocketed into the stratosphere. The last time he went missing at UA, he ended up in the infirmary with injuries and new scars, so where was he now? Her cell phone rang, jolting her out of her thoughts. Stepping away, she answered the ringing. Hatsum Mei, future CEO of Hatsum Industries, she recited with a distinct lack of her usual enthusiasm. Hello, this is Recovery Girl from UA High School. You are the daughter of Hatsum Ayumi and Mitsu, yes. Yes. Mei was no longer in the cafeteria. Instead, she was sprinting blindly down the hallways, attempting to recall the maps and directions they had received at orientation. I am calling about Midoriya Izuku. He has you on his emergency contact list dash. The infirmary is in the Hero Course building, right? She half shouted into the phone. Because I can't remember the map and I'm just running around the school and dash. You're a student, she mumbled, the noise barely carrying through the phone. Yes now dash. Oh sheet, there's a blood trail. Mei halts at the doorway of classroom 1A for a brief moment, eyeing the vermilion color scattered in droplets, leaving a path of sorts for her to follow. I'll be there in a minute. Hanging up the phone, Mei bolted down the hallway and narrowly avoided slamming herself into a wall. She passed an equally harried present mic on the way, their eyes meeting for half of a second before they continued in opposite directions. Heaving in the air, Mei knocked on the door to the infirmary. An exhausted-looking man answered the door, staring at her blankly. His eyes traveled behind her, his eyes narrowing with annoyance. Glancing back, she realized that the entirety of Class 1A was arriving behind her. I'm Hatsum Mei. She introduced herself quickly. Where is he? Instead of answering, he widened the gap in the door enough for her to enter. She darted inside, hands trembling as she laid eyes on her best friend. Nothing looked wrong, per se, except for the paleness of his skin. Paleness could mean all sorts of medical mumbo-jumbo though. Don't wake him. She whirled around to see an exasperated recovery girl staring at her. He needs proper rest. I'm sorry about hanging up on you, she said, her voice wavering. Please, what happened? I'll let Aizawa explain that to you, she sighed, gesturing at the man standing in the doorway. Shoyuta did not possess the patience it would take to deal with them right now. Why are all of you here? He asked, knowing the answer. Sir, Ida shouted. We are concerned for Midoriya's well-being and health. Shoji informed us that Hatsum was contacted because he was in recovery girl's care. Don't forget the blood trail, Ashido commented, her eyes darting around in an attempt to peek into the room behind him. There was a blood trail. Aizawa. Yes, Bakugo, he sighed. It's the nerd's quirk, isn't it? Shoyuta barely kept the disinterested expression on his face. Bakugo knew? But since when? Go inside, Bakugo. Outraged cries burst from his concerned students, but he ignored that, preoccupied with the newest addition to the mysteries of the day. Leave, he commanded. Midoriya needs rest and you are all too loud. Before they could refute him, he shut the door in their faces. The room remained quiet, despite the additional people in the room, and Shoyuta lamented the fact that he needed to break the peace in the room. We have questions for both of you. They both turned, eyeing each other up. How do you know Zuzu? Hatsum inquired suspiciously. He's never mentioned you before. I've known him longer than you, Shitrag, Bakugo fired back. And he's never mentioned you either. Stop antagonizing each other, Shoyuta ordered, flaring his quirk in warning. I will kick both of you out if I need to. Our questions can wait. The pair thankfully shut their mouths and waited, glaring at each other. He did not want to even begin unpacking the meaning behind that short-lived interaction, so he leaned against the wall, hands clean of blood but still pink from the scrubbing, and stared them down. Do both of you know about his quirk? Hatsum's head snapped up. He doesn't have a dash. I knew. Bakugo cut her off. It's effing mystery to me how it's so effed up dash. Shizenji slapped his arm. Don't curse like that in my workspace. Hatsum looked between all of them in confusion. What are you talking about? She implored. Deku has a shitty quirk, dreadlocks. Bakugo snapped. Shizenji whacked his arm again and he sked. Moving on, Shoyuta drawled. Bakugo, do you have any details? If you're that curious, why don't you check his fine through that journal he's so obsessed with? Quirk analysis, Shoyuta realized. Bakugo might be onto something. Go to the classroom, grab his bag, make sure his notebook is in it, and bring it back here. He stiffened. Don't tell me what to dash. Do as I say or you'll be expelled. Shoyuta pinned his student with a stare, forcing him to relent. The door slammed shut behind him. Aijiro stared at the blood on the wall, on the floor and on the desk, bewildered along with the rest of the class. They had returned in hopes of figuring something out because what the hell kind of quirk injured the user? But the moment they were inside the classroom, they stopped short at the scene before them. Dude, those are some gnarly scars you have on your arm. Was he even going to get the chance to apologize for that? Bakugo appeared out of nowhere, shoving past all of them, and barely paused at the scene worthy of a horror movie to pick up the lone backpack left in the room. He rummaged through it while the class tried to pry answers out of him. Apparently, he found whatever he was searching for because his palms crackled with explosions and he was gone, leaving them alone without any answers. Bakugo returned not long after his departure and shoved the backpack into his arms. His shitty notebook is in there, he growled, taking a seat on the far end of the room. And by God, the contents of the notebook were terrifying. His coworkers all had pages chock full of analyses on them and ways to completely destroy them in combat and negate or avoid their quirks. The suggested paths for improvement were interesting and the questions he posed were looking into some things Shoyuta hadn't even thought of. I don't think what you're looking for is in there. He looked up to see Hatsum's eyes locked on the notebook. Zuzu has way too many of those things lying around. If he was doing an analysis on himself, it would be in an older journal, maybe even have one of its own. Do you know where he keeps them? Yeah, they're all scattered in a few different locations, but I'll get them for you. Shoyuta nodded. I'll arrange for one of the teachers to escort you wherever you need to be. Do my moms know? She asked suddenly. They were the first ones I called, Shizenji assured her. His attention strayed from the notebook, looking between the two students in the room. Do either of you know anything about Midoriya's mother or how to contact her? If anyone were to possess information on his parents, mother, or father, it had to be one of them. Hatsum bristled instantly, her demeanor becoming closed off and furious. You'd be better off not contacting that hag at all, I think, she spat, eyes narrowed in resentment. Or maybe you should. Then I can see what kind of sheet person it takes to leave her son alone for months on end. Watch what you say about her, dreadlocks, Bakugo growled. Hatsum ignored him in favor of focusing on Aizawa. I've known Zuzu for nearly a year and I've never seen her. Not a glimpse or a photo. She never drops him off or picks him up. In the few times I've been in his apartment, it looked like only he lived there. She scowled at the floor, curling her hands into fists. Honestly, he sort of lives at Dagoba Beach and that place is homier to him than the apartment. Inko, whoever she is, isn't part of Zuzu's life and I don't think she should be at this point. Bakugo seemed to be having his own revelation, his hands falling to his sides as he lost himself in his head, but Shuta's number of questions to answer just raised itself. You think he lives alone in an apartment? Hatsum winced. He stays at Dagoba and my house mostly, but yeah, that's what I gather. Bakugo, in your experience, what is Midoriya's mother like? Startled from his thoughts, his head snapped up. All I remember is her being really freaking nice, he said lowly, more to himself than to Shoyuta. My mom hasn't mentioned her in a while and I can't remember the last time I saw her. A name finally registered in his mind. You said he stays mainly at your home in Dagoba Beach? Isn't that where most illegal trash dumps are? Hatsum nodded and wiped at her red eyes. It's also a great source of scrap and parts. That's how we met actually, she chuckled softly, glancing at Midoriya. My parents run a mech shop and he started selling them parts he salvaged. All by himself? Shoyuta almost asked. Bakugo, see if your mother has any means of contact with Midoriya's mother. Whoever this woman was, wherever she disappeared to, it undoubtedly rested in Shuta's mind that she left her son alone for far too long. Exactly how long he could only guess. As to why, he looked at Midoriya's pale face, his freckles splattered across his cheeks, and thought of how society would see him. It only fueled the fire of fury within him to think of why Midoriya Inko would leave her son on his own. Hatsum's mother's arrival was akin to that of a strike of lightning. Everyone already present in the room jolted at their sudden entrance. On their tail, ectoplasm glided into the room, silent and serene. The shorter of the two looked like Hatsum's relative. Her hair, like her daughter's, was a salmon pink but it stood spiked on her head, close cut to her head. Her golden eyes landed on Midoriya and her daughter at his side. The lankier one stood silently at her side, like an executioner standing by her queen as she examined the room. Her dark skin and silver eyes swept over the room, her webbed appendages fluttering when she saw Midoriya. The gills in her neck vibrated slightly, a rumble sounding in the room. Their daughter nodded at them, silently passing information, and Hatsum, the short-haired one, there were too many in the same room now, stalked over to Shizenji, her figure looming over her with an expectant look plainly written across her face. When they explained, their intimidating demeanors dropped, and she sat heavily in a provided chair by her daughter. I knew something was wrong, but not dash. She lifted her head out of her hands and peered over to Midoriya. Not this. Ayumi, as they'd thankfully been introduced, put a reassuring hand on her wife's shoulder. Mom, I need to go find Zuzu's journals, Mei said, standing from her seat. Determination blazed as she locked eyes with Shoyuta. Ectoplasm, could you escort Hatsum wherever she needs to go? Of course. He inclined his head to the occupants of the room and they swiftly disappeared through the door. Do you have any information on Midoriya's mother? He asked on a whim, figuring why not at this point. Ayumi's ear fins flared, shuddering in disdain, and she met his eyes with a glare. Mitsu's response was a smothered snarl into her hands. That beach? Never had the chance to meet her. Good for her though, her eyes glinted with rage. Because as soon as I see her, I'm going to sock her in her child-negligent face. Bakugo shifted in the corner of the room. Anytime she comes up in a conversation, Izuku swerves hard to avoid answering. He doesn't mention her, and from what Maze told me, he barely ever stays in that apartment. She stopped and fixed her gaze onto Shoyuta, making sure he heard her. The apartment, by the way, I've been inside a couple of times and it's so barren. You wouldn't think a person lived there at all if you walked in. His room had a few items, notebooks and sheet, but the other bedroom is completely devoid of knickknacks and clutter. Are you aware that he stays at Dagoba Beach as well? Her head snapped up. He'll take that as a no. That dump. She swore and curled her hands into tight fists. Nah, to hell that, I'll adopt him, I've been planning to anyway, and he can live with my us. My wife's fully on board, has been since she met him, and she cursed again and put her elbows on the bed. How to convince his overly selfless but, though. He'll say he's effing fine and that we shouldn't worry, mom's just busy my butt. Can you understand, Giselle? Yumi asked. Shoyuta signed the affirmative. I would like you to know that we're his family now, and I don't particularly care if that woman comes back. We love him, and the only reason I would ever want her near him was so that she may apologize for being such a subpar mother. Shoyuta gave her an appraising look and decided he liked her. It sounds like there's a general consensus surrounding Midoriya's mother. He glanced at the boy, watching the rise and fall of his chest. Getting this done won't be easy. Shoyuta had a feeling he didn't need to reference what wouldn't be easy. I know. God, I know, but we can't just dash. We have connections in the police force that will look into his situation, but the best we can offer him would be to put him under the temporary guardianship of a teacher here using the school's guidelines to ensure that he is being taken care of. And if he told us everything? Then he'd be in a proper home in a third of the time, but most kids in his situation don't spill their guts because they're promised something better than what they have. How long will it take to put him under your care? Ayumi asked, pinning him with her metallic stare. My care? Yeah, we assumed you were going to take him, Mitsu said, her eyes narrowing. I'd need to talk it over with my husband first. He knew, though, that Hisashi would never turn Midoriya away. But you're right, that is my intention. Then let's get detailed. The rhythmic beeping near him was the first thing he noticed. Opening his eyes to see the colorless ceiling, the pain in his head grew quiet, hushed by the darkness surrounding him. The panic that arose inside him as his memories returned, Eraserhead, expressionless, and still under the influence of his quirk, reached the monitor before he fully processed it. Would they let him stay after this? He used his quirk on a hero. He attacked a teacher. Izuku prayed that Eraserhead was okay. Did he hate him now? He didn't want Eraserhead to hate him. He hadn't even made it past his homeroom class. What time was it? Maybe he could... An unsympathetic 142 stared him down from above the door. His eyes burned with unshed tears. Don't cry. He pushed himself up into a sitting position. Don't even breathe, his voice hissed bitterly, then maybe you can forget how badly you screwed up. No one else lay asleep or otherwise in the room. It was just him and his thoughts as they fought and shoved to consume him in their frenzy of emotions. Izuku grieved for his lost chances, for the doors that opened only to surely be slammed in his face. He raged at himself, sick of how he always threw away what he craved. Fingers curling around his arms with a bruising grip, he hugged himself, desperately searching for any sort of reprieve from this nightmare, from himself. A sob ripped out of his throat, broken and rough. One of his hands pulled at his hair in frustration, shame in hatred, and he closed his eyes in a futile attempt to halt the hot streams of water pouring out. Minutes passed. Izuku carefully swung his legs off the bed. His entire body felt stiff, a familiar sensation, disturbingly enough. Dying more than once was usually not something a person, let alone a child, could attest to. Resuscitation involved multiple compressions to his chest. Hard compressions. As in, he felt it now, and it would probably stay with him longer than the stiffness in his body. The tile floor sent chills up from his feet the moment he made contact with the cold surface. The 4 in his arm held him close to the bed but allowed him a few steps of freedom. The last thing he needed right now was to take out his 4 and have people barging in thinking he died or something. Hunger announced itself loudly with a rumble from his stomach. He should just leave. No one would want him around anymore, so why not leave? They're going to be so disappointed. Izuku cringed at the thought of the Hatsum's reaction. I already ruined my chances. The door opened soundlessly. Izuku watched, frozen, as Eraserhead stepped in the room with a coffee and a bun holding his hair up. They locked eyes and stared at each other for a few moments, the clock ticking audibly in the thick silence. Am I being expelled? If the question took him by surprise, he didn't show it. 4? He asked in a tone softer than any teacher had ever used with him. Izuku's face scrunched up in confusion. What did you mean, 4? I've read all those long-winded rules for grounds of expulsion and suspension. He glared at his teacher's blank expression. I used my quirk on you, a teacher. Severity and situation of the matter at hand and in context, I attacked you unprovoked and trapped you with my quirk. That puts me in the red zone. I missed all my classes but homeroom. You look okay but dash. He scanned Eraserhead critically, despair written helplessly across his face. Did I hurt you? No, Midoriya, and you're not being expelled. The relief had him leaning on the bed again. Thank God, May would have killed me. We do, however, have some questions. Izuku looked up and nodded. Of course they would, given everything that occurred. Would you be willing to answer some now, or would you prefer to wait until morning? I'm fine doing it now, sir. He was not fine. The very idea of being questioned about any of the events that took place yesterday sent alarm bells ringing through his head and made it harder to breathe. What made you dissociate? Right into it, huh? No prep? Just going for the jugular. This place is too new, Izuku replied uncomfortably. And I'm too used to being in my middle school. And what about your middle school made this the norm? I didn't get lost in my head often, Izuku said firmly. I just got scared, he finished lamely. Of what? I got beat up a lot in middle school, he confessed, feeling his face heat up. People like to break my things. But I swear I never used my quirk on them. If I did, I don't think I'd be here now. He tapered off with a nervous chuckle. Eraserhead's expression shifted slightly. Because of your quirk or because of the students at your old school? He asked carefully. My quirk? Izuku threw out quickly. Sure, they all hated me but they would never go as far as dash. Were you protecting your notebook? Izuku's mind snapped out of his defensive stupor in an instant. Excuse me? Eraserhead turned and grabbed something off of a nearby table. His notebook, he realized, but not his current one. These contain in-depth analyses of heroes and villains alike, sketches, as well as questions and observations. You have listed flaws and limitations pertaining to their quirks and their skill sets. There are even suggestions for how they might improve themselves. Eraserhead looked down at the worn notebook he held loosely in his hand. There are multiple scenarios written about how to effectively take down each of your entries. I know the support department would go crazy over some of these designs for gear. You could make an insane amount of profit advising heroes and helping them improve if their pride could handle you scrutinizing everything they have yet to improve on. Izuku's face burned, suddenly taking inventory of the fact that all his notebooks were stacked behind Eraserhead. He picked up Izuku's previous notebook, the one Bakugo blew up. There are several with torn pages and crispy edges. It's no wonder you felt threatened when you thought you were back in hostile territory. Why do you have all my notebooks? He squeaked, eyeing the bright colors of his first few journals. God, he'd gotten those when he was 6. Why were they all here? We thought we might find something about your quirk in one of them. Instead, we found a breakdown of all our staff and too many heroes to count. Very dangerous information you've compiled in all these. I like the ideas you have down for my goggles. Mike certainly got a kick out of your word vomit. Thank you, Eraserhead. He glanced at Izuku. Call me Aizawa, kid. I'm your teacher. Okay, he agreed. I'm off track. Aizawa set his notebook down. What's your quirk? Izuku's flush disappeared, leaving him pale. His hands fidgeted as he avoided his teacher's eyes. Well, I don't actually know that much about it. Do you always die when you use it? No, but it always hurts. He clenched his jaw. I can't lose focus either, or else I might accidentally use it on someone. Aizawa leaned forward, catching his eye for a moment. What does that mean? My quirk, it's touch-based, but all it needs to activate is skin on skin. I don't need all 5 fingers. Izuku peered down at his hands. I used to wear gloves but I couldn't keep buying new ones. The silence, though it only lasted a second, made Izuku stiffen. I didn't see much when you used your quirk on me, it was all dark. I could only see myself and then I heard my own voice. Something started coming into view and then you pulled me out. Izuku sighed in relief. That's good, he muttered, relaxing slightly. What would I have seen if you hadn't pulled me out? He said it cautiously, like he knew Izuku possessed a quirk that could hurt everyone he touched. The careful flatness of his tone nagged at Izuku's nerves, his instincts demanding he lie, skirt the truth, anything to keep him safe and unhated. Sir? Oh well, I honestly don't know what you would have seen. Izuku started. I've only purposefully used my quirk a few times. And one of those was forced. That's the only reason I know anything about my quirk in the first place. It's not exactly like any of them told me what I did to them. What do you know? Izuku took a deep breath, psyching himself to tell his teacher something he had never once said aloud to anyone. He hesitated, terror shooting through him at the thought, but if it all because here he finally was. He was at UA and even though they might chuck him out for having a quirk like his, he seriously contemplated lying outright and saying he didn't know jack about his quirk. He had a chance to stay. Stay and learn how to be a proper hero, to learn how to save people and be good. Izuku wanted to be a hero. My quirk, when activated, puts a person at war with everything they think is wrong with themselves. He looked away from Aizawa in shame, praying that he wouldn't be disgusted with him. I really tried to keep my quirk off since I couldn't wear gloves. You've been actively suppressing your quirk? Aizawa interjected urgently. When did you start? Izuku's mind brought forth the memory of gloves smacking him in his face, his mother a few feet away from him, a mix of bewilderment and anger staring him down as she ordered him to put them on and made him promise to never take them off. Don't touch me, her voice shook, but he could tell it wasn't from fear. Don't touch anybody ever again. Her shouts echoed inside his head, the gloves too big, the air outside too warm, as he wandered around the apartment complex. She didn't want him to touch her because of his quirk. So that meant she would be nice if she knew he wouldn't ever use it, right? I think I was 5. He says it as if he was encased in a memory again and, judging by the distant look in his eyes, he definitely had something on his mind that he didn't bring up. Should his brain scream distress and demanded retribution for whoever put it in this kid's head at 5 years old that his quirk was so utterly horrible that he needed to concentrate to keep it completely off? 5. He said instead of the curse that nearly came out in a hoarse whisper. What? Midoriya, no wonder you nearly died using it. The kid, that goddamn problem child, flinched and looked up at him with those wide emerald eyes, confusion gleaming in their depths. What do you mean? Says the quirk analyst, Shoyuta hisses. Quirks are extensions of us, Midoriya. They are an evolved supergene that manifested and wove into our DNA. It is a part of your very being that you have focused on keeping down. For 10 he stops and holds his coffee mug tighter. You've denied your body and mind access to your quirk and it puts too much stress on you when you do allow it some leeway. 10 years of constant suppression and then sudden usage would kill anybody. The realization that dawned on his face let Shoyuta feel some sort of relief. At least he knew the why now. But this new development glared in the face of any comfort he'd found. He met many who disliked, who hated, and loathed their quirks, but only a rare few of them ever admitted to shoving their quirks away instead of simply ignoring them. Skin-on-skin contact initiates the possibility of his quirk activating if he doesn't concentrate. Uniforms took care of most exposed skin, but his hands, his body from the neck up, he couldn't cover them. Except he had gloves, part of him seeds, gloves that he couldn't keep buying. That meant someone destroyed them. Someone stole a safeguard and a reason to let himself relax his focus. Let me be clear, Midoriya, Shoyuta said calmly. Do not suppress your quirk anymore. We will provide you with gloves if you need us to, and I'm going to offer you quirk counseling so that we may train you to safely use your quirk without such deadly consequences. But what if dash? What if you need to use your quirk and you can't? Shoyuta cut in, his eyes glaring down at him. What if you do use it and you die? What then? Is there someone to resuscitate you, or do you just die because you're too scared of your own quirk? He paused, pinching the bridge of his nose. You have potential, Midoriya. Be rational and accept Yue's help. Accept my help. Midoriya stared at his bed, thinking hard for a few moments. When he looked back up, Shoyuta resisted the urge to grin. I accept your offer, Aizawa-sensei. Can I go to class? Recovery Girl mocked with distaste. I feel fine, I promise. Izuku pleaded, attempting to placate Recovery Girl. She scoffed, Aizawa walking in with another cup of coffee. You were dead for 2 minutes several hours ago. You are not going to class. Izuku dropped his head into his hands and groaned in despair. They'd been doing this for 5 minutes, her shoving medical jargon down his throat, him refusing to swallow it. Aizawa didn't seem to be inclined to argue on either of their behalf, which Izuku wasn't sure whether he should be irritated about or not. No offense, but I have more experience with this than you do. I know I'm okay. He insisted. The first time it happened, I walked home with stiff muscles, slept, and went to school the next day, good as new. The stiffness passed, so I'm good to go. Good as new was stretching it a little. The day after the sludge villain incident, Izuku had nearly skipped school because of how terrible his body felt. Apparently, being nearly suffocated to death and, later, actually dying was not the best thing for one's body. She pressed her lips into a tight line. How many times has this happened, exactly? Recovery Girl stepped closer. Who helped you afterward? Nobody, he almost snapped. It only happened one other time, now will you please let me go to my classes? I already missed pretty much the entire first day. Young man, I assure you, your excuse is irrefutable. She tapped her cane on the tiled flooring and glanced back at his file. You woke up 30 minutes ago, I still need to give you a thorough check. Homeroom is in an hour. He turned to Aizawa, searching for any kind of assistance he might find. Come on, I haven't even been able to see the Hatsums yet. There arises a topic your teacher avoided during your early morning discussion. Recovery Girl turned around, shuffling to her desk. What? Izuku glanced between the two adults, unease welling up within him. Aizawa sighed, eyeing his defensively drawn-up shoulders. We know you live alone, Midoriya. Izuku froze, then peered back at the notebooks stacked neatly on the counter. He cursed the lack of information on his file, knowing that there were no people aside from the Hatsums listed as his emergency contacts. He should have put together that May gathered all his notebooks for them, possibly with a teacher. That meant they knew about Dagoba, and Aizawa clearly stated that they knew he lived alone. How did he explain this? What reply would make them leave him be and let him return to the beach, where the waves still reached his little space carved out in a heap of metal? What could he say to them for him to be allowed back to the Hatsum's house without fanfare? How did he get back to the comforting warmth, to the never-silent home the Hatsums had given him? My mom's job requires her to be far away. She doesn't like the idea of me being alone, so I spend a lot of time with the Hatsums. His voice is surprisingly steady, but he could hear the brittleness to his voice. If they tried to bend him, he would shatter. And your place at Dagoba Beach? May and I spend a lot of time there, so I thought it'd be nice to have a resting place where we could just sit around together. She told them about it. May searched it for his notebooks, presumably with a teacher present. May told them about it. Izuku leaned back onto the bed, putting his hands onto the sheets to hide their trembling. The Hatsums say they haven't seen your mother once in all the time they've known you. Bakugo says he hasn't seen her in years and his mother stopped talking with her a long time ago. Izuku was pulled from his thoughts, harshly thrown back into reality. Bakugo? Nope. Bakugo. Bakugo. He was here. He's the only other person we know that has had experience with your quirk, Aizawa says. But let's not stray from the topic at hand. Your apartment is barren of anything that would make it a home, including a few basic items. I'm minimalistic. Even if that was a good answer, minimalists still eat, Midoriya. Who says I don't? The lack of virtually any food except for granola bars. Ah, but the granola bars are not a meal, Recovery Girl said shortly. I eat with the Hatsums. So I've heard. You eat with them each day. Is your mother so preoccupied that she has absolutely zero time to spend with her son? Abruptly he asked, why isn't she on your emergency contact list? Izuku's eyes twitched, internally scrambling to patch each hole Aizawa poked in his story. Was he abruptly changing the topic to try and catch him off guard? Was that what this was? Still, Izuku hesitates, even though he knows it'll be the death of him, and sighed. Look, she's too far away to come around if anything happens to me. She's on planes half the time too, so it's not like she's available at any time. Knowing full well that she wouldn't give a flying F about anything that happened yesterday, Izuku wondered if his mother was in planes often. Aizawa doesn't pause. What is her phone number? Izuku knows he isn't leaving with his life intact. Not when his teacher is being so DMN nosy. I don't know, Izuku muttered, an icy feeling spreading through him. Does she not call you? From what we know, she doesn't visit you. She's just busy, okay? His voice was failing him now, old lies he used to tell himself coming out cracked and quiet. She didn't abandon me. The rapid-fire questions stopped, Aizawa's voice unfaltering and firm. Midoriya Izuku, under the power of the Pro-Hero Childcare Acts, I invoke an emergency foster license and revoke your mother's guardianship, effective immediately. You will be staying with my husband and I until your home situation has been thoroughly investigated. If it is deemed fit for you, you may return. If not, we will have to discuss more permanent actions being taken. Izuku blinked and stared directly into his hero's eyes, attempting to gauge whether or not he was serious. Really? He asked, drawing out the word. He looked at Recovery Girl, who gave her full attention to the document she wrote on, and frowned at the glimpse of amusement he caught. Can he really do that? Is that allowed? Yes, she answered decisively. Behave for him and Yamada, would you? Who the hell was Yamada? Izuku wouldn't be going off to live with people he didn't know. No way in hell. But the Hatsums have graciously offered their services to pack your belongings while school is in session, Aizawa stated, cutting him off. We will be meeting them at your apartment to make sure they didn't miss anything, and then we will go to my home. Hold on. Recovery Girl, I'll be expecting him in class. With a nod to her, he left the room. A moment of silence filled the room, static filling Izuku's ears. Fine, you're free to go after this checkup. She muttered with a scowl. The uniform they gave him was too big. Not enough to hinder him but enough for him to notice. The gloves he wore were meant for when he worked with Mei, so they were kind of bulky and not meant for wearing during everyday life. Not that it mattered. It was such a slight change compared to everything else, so why the hell would it matter when his sense of normalcy and his life was going to be uprooted? Was this why people said the first days of school were the worst? Was this why people said school was hell? His experience felt unique. He certainly hoped no one else had to go through what he had. Regardless, too much shit happened. Let's check things off, see where Izuku feels like he wants to go apes hit, and go from there. He made it into the hero course. He went to class and did not get expelled, but people stared and commented on his scars. Not the best, but alright. At the end of homeroom he had a flashback and accidentally attacked his teacher with his quirk. Not good, not FNG good, man. Then he died and was resuscitated. Could have gone worse? I guess? He missed all of his goddamn classes and his notebooks were thoroughly looked through by his teachers. They probably saw all the FING comments I made about their costumes and gear. They hate me now, don't they? They only have his notebooks because Mei searched for them and somehow brought them all. Mei told them. Mei told them. Mei told them. He was offered quirk training. Nerve-wracking and terrifying, but kind of nice to think about. What else? Well, let's see. His teacher forcibly acquired guardianship over him. There we go, that's the kicker. Now, not only does he not get to return to Dagoba or the Hatsum's house, but he's being forced to live at Aizawa's instead. A man who he trusts as a hero. A man who he does not know in the slightest. All he really knows is that he is a teacher and that does absolutely nothing to quell his concern. Here seems like a good place to lose his goddamn mind. Izuku stopped his stroll in the middle of the sidewalk and looked over at the entrance gate of the school. Maybe if he ran now he would be able to escape to somewhere. The Hatsums were in on this scheme, a fact he bitterly wished to ignore, so going to them to hide would only lead him back here. He ran his gloved hand over the too large sleeve of his uniform and tugged the end of the sleeve. Sighing, he resolved to await whatever the day would bring him and roll with the punches like he always did. Sooner than he thought, he stumbled across his first weird thing of the day. Tokoyami, who was kneeling by a bird feeder. Izuku crept up on him, peering over him to watch as he handed his odd shadow companion bird seeds. "He can eat?" Izuku questioned. Both beings jolted, his presence taking them by surprise. "Oh, sorry. Hi, I'm Midoriya," he introduced, stepping back. "I'm in your class." "Indeed," Tokoyami said, rising to his feet. "You were the enigma who vanished. You caused quite the stir." "Stir?" The shadow figure laughed. "This kid disappeared and from what we saw and Shoji heard, he should still be with Recovery Girl." "What you saw?" Izuku echoed nervously. Tokoyami glanced at him. "In the classroom, we found blood pooled on the ground and splattered across a desk. Naturally, we have been concerned." Izuku let out a squeaky, "Huh," tugging at his gloves. "Yeah, I can see where you're coming from. I will not pry, but do exercise caution. You are an intriguing character who I would loathe the demise of." He gently pet the shadow, which stayed small at his side. "Thanks," he gave them a smile. "So, do you have a name?" Izuku said to the purple-black bird thing. He sort of reminded him of Kurogyri, with his similar colors and glowing yellow eyes. "His name is Dark Shadow, he is my companion." Dark Shadow nodded and waved one of his clawed hands at him. "It's nice to meet both of you," Izuku said cheerily, offering a toothy smile. Tokoyami stared at his face for a moment, then laughed when Dark Shadow hid behind him. "Sorry." Izuku spat out quickly. "Did I do something?" Tokoyami shook his head, a grin spread across his face. "No, you have not committed a misdeed," he assured. "Dark Shadow just tends to shy away from brightness." He paused, meeting Izuku's eyes. "You are very bright." Izuku tilted his head to the side for a moment, unsure of what he meant. The meaning clicked and he felt heat rise to his cheeks, eyes widening as they both kept staring at him. Thank you." Izuku played with the end of his sleeve. "I hope we'll get to know each other better." Tokoyami smiled down at him and Dark Shadow winked. "Class will begin soon, we should travel to our homeroom." "Why yeah." Izuku agreed. When they walked in, their small talk was immediately cut short by Ida rushing over to them, his hands slicing down in front of Izuku. "Midoriya." "Wow, look at that," everyone was staring at him now. "Are you alright?" "We are all very concerned." Izuku inched past him, waving goodbye to Tokoyami and a receding Dark Shadow. "Yeah, I'm fine. No need to worry, Ida." But, despite his claims, when he sat down at his desk, everyone, sans Bakugo, was most definitely waiting for an explanation. "What the hell are you extras doing by my FNG desk?" "Oh thank God, Bakugo's here." He never thought that would be a sentence he would say. "We're worried about Midoriya, man," Kaminari shouted. "We weren't allowed to see him and there was a ton of blood dash." "Not my FNG problem," Dunce face. He set his bag down and scowled at their classmates, ignoring their protests. "Beat it," he ground out. Nicely enough, they did scatter, going back to their own groups. Aizawa entered, ordering silence. Izuku refused to look at him. He had entirely forgotten about their hero course lesson. With all might. But he really didn't want to deal with his righteousness right now. "I am entering the room like a normal person." Izuku groaned internally, resigning himself to the overwhelming exasperation. When they changed into their costumes, no one made a comment on his scars, but he felt their eyes. He brushed it off, He dealt with it before, he could handle it now. His costume was a dark green jumpsuit, holsters and pockets present for his support gear. He wore black gloves that ended above his elbows under the jacket he made and pulled up his hood, fixing it into place. His respirator could lay on his neck for the moment until he knew what they would be doing. Goggles sat at the top of his head, black and akin to Eraserheads in style. Hatsum, Ayumi, and Mitsu were both trained in combat. Granted, they mainly knew self-defense, but that was a major step towards a decent offense. They gladly taught him what they knew. Falling right, training your body to react with form in mind, how to block and slip from someone's grasp, they taught him and Mei everything. Wow, Midoriya, that costume is so cool, Uraraka said, appearing at his side. Her voice dropped and she gave him a sideways glance. You actually are okay, right? You don't need to sit out or something? Izuku nodded firmly. She nodded back, accepting his answer. Man, all of you got such cool outfits. Hagakure whined, her gloved hands twisting in the air. I have to agree. Yaoyorozu looked down at her outfit with a pinched face. This leaves something to be desired. Izuku looked between them with mild confusion. You both know they could have made your costume with your hair or something, right? They take your DNA and incorporate it so that it works with your quirk. What? Hagakure deadpanned as Yaoyorozu struggled to find the right words, settling for a miserable groan. If you contact the department, they won't refuse you. If they do, then I think you should report them. For what? A nasally voice snickered. Liking the ladies? Izuku grabbed the purple-haired boy by the back of his clothing and pulled him away from the girls. Touch them without their permission, and I'll punt you into a wall. He warned. Are you ready to begin? He let go and the boy scrambled to make an escape. The girls gave him thankful smiles of respect. Izuku ended up being teamed with Kirishima against Shoji and Todoroki. They'd be going first, pleasantly enough. Izuku wanted to be able to observe without worrying about his own match. For now though, he had 10 minutes to come up with a plan to protect their bomb. Your quirk is hardening, he stated, loading his gun. I can't use a quirk, but that hardly matters. Hey, Midoriya, about yesterday dash. We can talk about that later. Izuku cut him off. We're against two powerhouses and we don't have time to waste. Are you willing to make a plan with me? Kirishima looked put out, like he still wanted to say something. Yeah, let's win this. Izuku grinned. Alright, give me feedback as I start saying things because I tend to talk a lot. Right? So, Todoroki has a temperature manipulation quirk but he's frozen his left side. Maybe he won't use his fire? From what I gather, he's got extraordinary ability and control. He could, theoretically, try to freeze us out. What did we do then? Izuku raised an eyebrow, raising his gloved hand. Your quirk should be able to break through ice and my gloves aren't just for show. They are useful. Good points, good points. After that, they'll come in. Todoroki seems like the loner type but Shoji is friendly enough to try and plan with him. His quirk is great for surveillance but he's strong too. I think you should guard the bomb, Kirishima, while I be the first line of defense. My support gear works long and short range and I don't know how much training you have in close combat fighting. Your quirk requires it, but do you know proper fighting techniques? I started going to a class during middle school. He shrugged. I'm still not great at fighting with technique, but I can brute force my way through a lot. Then yeah, I should go out. Do you know how to shoot? His puzzled look was enough of an answer. He unloaded a few smaller pieces of ammunition and placed them in a bag, offering them. These won't explode, right? He said as Izuku handed them off. You're not gonna blow me up like the zero-pointer? Izuku laughed. These are sticky bombs. When they hit something they'll explode and trap someone under them. Izuku handed him another few in a separate pouch. These are for if you hit someone in the face or you need to get them out quickly. Just crush them in your hand over the substance and it will release the person. Use them accordingly and definitely keep your quirk in mind if you end up fighting. I just gotta throw 'em? Be careful though, don't accidentally activate them. They're frozen now and if we're lucky Todoroki will provide us with some premium ice to keep them nice and chilly until you might have to put them to use. Not too cold though, or else they'll bounce right off their target. He drew a breath. If I come across both of them, the fight might end pretty quickly depending on their coordination, Izuku confessed, fiddling with his firearm. And if they split up? You sure know how to cheer a guy up, Izuku answered, matching his teammate's grin. If they split up, I would have to worry about Shoji alerting Todoroki to my every move, or Todoroki? Well, then I just have to deal with Todoroki. You have enough to defend yourself with? Do you have a plan of attack cooked up? Course I do, Izuku said. Shoji relies on his senses to tell him where someone is, and I can use that against him. His strength and many limbs could definitely be troublesome if he gets close, but I don't intend to let that happen. Todoroki, on the other hand, could go either way. Because he might not use his fire? That would definitely work better for close range than his ice. You are so right, but I kind of meant that when people have flashy quirks, they tend to rely on them almost entirely. He might not know how to handle a fistfight. Izuku peered up at Kirishima. Or he could be. He's a little hard to read with all the silence. Are you telling me he's essentially a pass-fail? Yeah, but if he gets past me, I'm confident in your abilities. Kirishima flashed him a sharp-toothed smile. Thanks, Midoriya. Also, Izuku added, meeting Kirishima's gaze. Radio silence will likely be the best course of action. Right, yeah, Shoji could totally mess us up if he overheard us. They nodded at each other, trusting that their partner would do their part. Time's up. Heroes, you may enter. Izuku nodded in unison with his partner, turning to the door only to watch it be encased in ice. Ice that was quickly coming at him. Jump! He called out, leaping out to the already frozen floor. Frost crawled up his legs, puffs of air becoming visible in the cold. Kirishima broke his leg out of a patch of ice, shivering. Izuku looked at the door, then at his teammate, before pushing himself back across the ice to him. What are you? Izuku ignored him, handing off his jacket. It's got heaters in the lining, Izuku said as he moved back to the door. His gloves radiated heat, water running down the door. He waved to Kirishima without looking back and left the room, closing the door softly behind him. Pulling his goggles down, he switched to thermal vision, striding down the hallways until he caught sight of Todoroki. He was alone, half cold, half lukewarm, likely from his ice side. Izuku focused as Todoroki turned a corner, heading into the hallway where he'd hopefully meet his demise. He switched back to normal sight and looked down at the gun in his hand. He'd given Kirishima 3 rounds, leaving him with 2 sticky bombs. For Shoji, if he showed his face, he had his own unharmful flashbangs and some awful-smelling gas in a capsule. He would have to use them sparingly. Todoroki turned the final corner into Izuku's path. He lunged at the unsuspecting student, knocking into him and leading with a hard crack at his face. Todoroki stumbled but managed to push him back, throwing a layer of ice Izuku's way. He surged over the wave and out of the corner pocket, to the hallway. Todoroki glared, sending another wave of ice. Izuku jumped the hurdle and fired at an angle. The momentum smacked them both into a wall on their ends of the hallway, but Todoroki, for all his struggling, couldn't break free from the goop that held his right side against the wall. Ice still came, but Izuku dodged and rolled and leaped until the capture tape was secured around his right arm. Todoroki has been captured. Izuku shuddered and pressed his gloves to the ice that encased the lower half of his body. God, he was cold. He stepped away with wet clothes, activating his thermal vision again to see Shoji entering the building at a swift pace. Shivering in the frozen building, Izuku turned to Todoroki. Freeze that sheet and it'll take longer to get it off. Heat it up and it'll just expand. I'll get you out after this is over. Taking off down the hall, he readied his mini arsenal and reloaded his gun. The pathway he'd come from was effectively blocked by Todoroki's ice, leaving him to find another way to get back to Kirishima. He had a sinking feeling that his plan wouldn't work as well as he wanted it to. He would slow Shoji down, but if he didn't want to be captured, he would need to lead Shoji back to Kirishima to waste his time and let Kirishima attack. Hopefully by then the time would be up. He was close enough. Shoji would have heard him by now. He secured his mask. Darting into the hallway Shoji was in, he threw out the capsule and a watered-down flashbang. His goggles and mouth cover protected him, but Shoji cried out at the assault. He charged and pushed off the wall, flying over Shoji. Izuku ran, his shoes aiding in his pseudo-escape. Shoji in hot pursuit, he did his best to avoid the tentacles that shot at him every 2 seconds as he led him back up the building. In all honesty, it wasn't his best plan to lead the enemy to the prize, but Shoji might notice a wild goose chase, and if he finished Izuku off, Kirishima would have no backup in a fight with him. Something latched onto his ankle. He crashed into the ground, the hard thud audible as he saw stars. Rolling over, Izuku threw out his last flashbang. Scrambling out of his hold, Izuku realized they were coming up on the room with Kirishima and the bomb. He didn't know how much time Shoji had, but if his tentacles lashing out at half the speed they were before was any indication, Izuku would bet it was nearly up. Kirishima! Incoming! Izuku yelled into the comms, sprinting into the last hallway to the room. He slapped a tentacle away and burst into the room, shooting to the side instead of running straight. Something behind him made contact with a splat and Izuku rushed to Kirishima's side, panting and shaking. The bomb had been pushed to the corner of the room, too far for Shoji to reach as Kirishima pelted him with all 3 bombs. Only his head stayed visible over the expanded slime compound. Shoji has been immobilized. Villains win. All Might declared. Izuku huffed and took off his mask and goggles. Yay! He offered breathlessly to Kirishima, who whooped and rushed to free Shoji. Let's get Todoroki, Izuku said as Shoji stepped away from the doorway he had been glued to. His face ached from its meeting with the floor and his shoulder pulsed with pain and it was still so cold. He wrapped his arms around his middle and attempted to fight the sluggishness. A small weight was added onto his shoulders and warmth encased his upper body. He melted into it, knees going weak at the relief. Hands steadied him and he stilled at the touch. It receded as fast as it appeared, gone in an instant. Sorry, Kirishima said sheepishly, then smiled. Thanks for the jacket, it's really nice. His eyelids drooped. The hands were back. This time he allowed himself to lean into them. More appeared and he was lifted off the ground, more warmth following as he was wrapped in something. His whole body continued to tremble, but he stayed awake. When they arrived at Todoroki, Izuku had to be let out of Shoji's arms to give them the anti-stick. His hands shook embarrassingly as he handed them to Kirishima, who threw him a concerned look. You have a fire quirk, right? Kirishima pointed out. Use it to help him warm up. His toes were numb when they exited the building, but at least he could feel his fingers. Todoroki's left hand stayed on his back, a constant presence of heat adding to his jackets. The building was indeed unfrozen, and when they arrived back to the group, Izuku, accompanied by the human space heater, Todoroki, was immediately sent to see Recovery Girl. DMN, that put quite the hole in his plan to observe his classmates' styles and quirks. He hadn't thought about what might happen if he got injured. There was a fleeting thought that Recovery Girl might be able to get him back to class quickly enough for him to catch the rest of the class's matches. Recovery Girl was not happy to see him. She muttered profusely about hypothermia and the unnecessary stress on his body. She ordered him to change out of his wet costume and told Todoroki to stay where he was. The rest of class came and went, Recovery Girl allowing them both to leave for lunch. At least I'll get to see the rest of them after lunch. Sorry, he blurted as they walked through the hallways. For making you use your quirk on me. Izuku clarified. My ice was the reason you were put in this position in the first place. He said flatly. Izuku hummed. Yeah, but you don't seem to like heating things up with your quirk. I'm surprised you wouldn't just use your quirk on both sides, but maybe it's easier to use it on one side compared to another? If you'd allow me to, I'd like to ask you about it later, but that's besides that point. You covered the hot half of your body with ice A, and so I thought you might have an aversion or be bad memories. Izuku stopped, feeling a cosmic hand settle on his shoulder and say, Shut the F up. Sorry, he said again. What do you mean, both sides? I can only use my ice on my right side. Thank you, God, for giving me something else to ramble about. Well, no one has 2 quirks, but there are some like yours, dual quirks, or quirk that may act as 2 separate forces. Yours is temperature-based and maybe your cells are split like your hair is, but you might be able to channel the rise or fall of the temperature on your other side if you practice or simply focus. You think I might be able to use her ice on my left side? There was something in his voice, something fragile and hopeful that Izuku wanted to assure. It's a hypothesis, but yeah, it's a definite possibility. He nudged Todoroki with his elbow, throwing a playful smile his way. But you have to work on close-range combat. It's so obvious you don't know how to fight without your quirk. My father says with a quirk as powerful as mine, I wouldn't need that. Bitterness lay in his tone, the air becoming thicker to Izuku. That's such bullshit, he laughed, apparently taking Todoroki by surprise. In a fight against someone like Eraserhead, you'd be toast. People with non-physical quirk tend to have resentment to those that do, and they have to work twice as hard to get to the same place. He coughed, suddenly aware of what he said. And not that you don't work hard. I'm sure you earned your place here just like everyone else. Todoroki's blank expression was betrayed by the upturning of his lips. Actually, it's common knowledge that I got in on a recommendation. But there are so many recommended students that get turned away. You and Yaoyorozu must be incredibly talented to have made it in. A hand landed on his shoulder, light and warm, but Izuku still flinched back. Todoroki retracted his hand, his face carefully neutral once more. Thank you for your confidence, Midoriya, but I assure you that I was not offended by your statements. Oh, okay. You aren't wrong to say I rely too much on my quirk. I could use a teacher. Perking up, Izuku nodded rapidly. I know a couple of women who are absolutely amazing. No, Todoroki interrupted. I want to learn from you. You beat me with efficiency, evaded Shoji, a multi-limbed, strong opponent, and won. Kirishima did not face us head-on. From what Shoji and Kirishima relayed to me, you were incredible in their eyes as well. You guys had time to talk? Izuku inquired, desperate to distract himself from how warm he felt. He knew he must look like a tomato from the neck up. You were very out of it while we were leaving ground beta. Would you be free? To meet with me? I have time this afternoon, we could meet in one of the gyms. This afternoon. He was supposed to meet with Aizawa and the Hatsums, maybe even his husband, and pick up his stuff. But Todoroki had the time and Izuku certainly didn't agree with any of Aizawa's plans. Gym Gamma? Izuku said. Right after school would be best. I'll get permission. Midoriya was a curious person. That is, to say, Shudo didn't know how to feel about him. He utilized the obvious amount of intelligence he had and was physically trained as well. In Shudo's eyes, he should be a competitor, someone to surpass. That's it. But he also didn't live up to Shudo's original estimation of his character. He was kind and easily flustered, not used to compliments or someone touching him. He was adept in battle but didn't say so himself. He hinted at having a non-physical quirk, something essentially everyone in Class 1A possessed. In the aftermath of the battle training, Shudo noted the change in his demeanor as well. During the trial, when he'd been captured, Midoriya held himself with a cool sort of confidence, something that quickly disappeared once they finished. Or rather, once Midoriya found his coherency. Midoriya told Shudo he might be able to use his mother's ice with his cursed left side. That in itself made him rethink his perception of Midoriya. He had been quick to pick up on his reluctance to use his father's fire, using it against him in the battle and trapped his offensive side, leaving his attacks limited. Shoji commented that he was amazingly agile, to dodge and evade all 6 of his limbs. He also used Shoji's enhancements against him with his own type of flashbangs and odd smells. When they returned to class after lunch, where he was jumped by the Hatsum girl, Midoriya stayed mostly to himself. After apologizing to Shoji for all the stuff he put his senses through, which Shoji waved off with a compliment on utilizing the counters for his quirk, he sat in the front, surrounded by classmates that he was friendly with, watching and writing about the matches as they proceeded. Garbled speech reached his ears and curiosity made Shudo lean towards him and peer down at his notebook. Analysis. It shouldn't have come as a surprise, given how skilled and attentive he was. All Might called on him and Yaoyorozu often to explain where and when someone faltered or could have done better. All Might seemed familiar with Midoriya in some way. They were tense around each other, All Might becoming more of a nervous wreck with every interaction. Midoriya, on the other hand, regarded him with indifference if he addressed him directly at all, which is to say, he did it once and lost most of his elation when he did. Going back to his notebook, Midoriya's mumbling turned quiet, barely audible compared to before. Before he had any time to pursue that train of thought, he looked up to see Midoriya fling himself around the corner of the building, wearing the same athletic uniform as him but wearing the long gloves of his hero costume. "Todoroki," he gasped. "Let's get inside." Midoriya was short. An obvious statement, but Shudo knew firsthand that he could make himself appear larger than he was. He was a threat in a fight, a force to be reckoned with. He stepped onto the mat, readying himself for a fight, but Midoriya stepped on, looked him up and down, then shook his head. "We aren't going to start with fighting. First, you need to know how to fall without breaking your neck." So that's what they did. Midoriya manhandled him gently, something he hadn't thought someone could do, and corrected his form. Most of it was embarrassing. Some partial moves that Midoriya performed with him were especially bad, but the green-eyed boy continued unfazed and Shudo followed in suit. Then they heard doors opening. Midoriya's muscles tensed at the noise of footsteps, but didn't look as Aizawa and Yamada, their English teacher, entered the gym. "I think we're done, Todoroki," Midoriya said softly, giving him a forced smile. He knew the uneasy tension that filled the air, the uncomfortable expression on his face, but Shudo also knew that whatever this was, it didn't concern him. He bowed to Midoriya. "Thank you for the lesson. Goodbye." Though the temptation to stay gripped him strongly, he walked away from Gym Gamma without a backward glance. The air tasted sour, but Izuku blamed his nerves for wrecking his taste buds. His hair stood on end and something heavy surrounded both of the figures that stopped a few feet away from the mat. Izuku was almost able to forget everything but teaching Todoroki. Ayumi's lessons were ingrained in how he moved, Mitsu's made into deep-rooted instinct. Were they angry with him now? They expected him and he ditched them for Todoroki. Maybe, if Aizawa was furious enough, he would rescind his emergency fostering and let Izuku go back to his old life. "Hey little listener, are you still there?" Izuku flinched at the familiar voice, finally turning to see Aizawa and Present Mike, or Yamada, as they called him in class. "I just want to go home," Izuku confessed quietly. "You don't have to do this." "Yeah, kid, we do," Aizawa told him softly. Yamada advanced, cautiously stepping onto the mat. "The Hatsums put your stuff together, but we can stay in the apartment for a while, if you need to." Izuku shook his head. That wasn't what he meant. Mei told them about Dagoba, but apparently she kept some of it to herself. He didn't want them to have access to such a private part of his life. He hoped they didn't live too far from Dagoba. They were pro-heroes, but he might still be able to slip out and find his way. In the car, Aizawa broke the strained silence. "You haven't been suppressing your quirk at all?" Izuku shook his head. "Those are some nice gloves you have on," Yamada commented from the front seat. "We can go look at more later, if you want." Izuku signed a quick thank you, finding himself unable to speak. Yamada beamed, glancing excitedly over to his husband. "Show, he knows Giselle," he whisper-shouted. Aizawa grunted in acknowledgement, approval lurking in his eyes. Ayumi was mute and Izuku had been quick to pick up JSL during the many nights he stayed too late and the Hatsums wouldn't let him leave without apparent escort. He, of course, mentioned that they could just drive him to the apartment themselves, but they said they didn't like the idea of him being alone. This caused many sleepovers and eventually he rarely saw the apartment unless he had to wash his clothes or the urge to scour his notebooks to review crept up on him. "Hitoshi will certainly be pleased." Yamada hummed cheerily. "Mac too, she hates noise in general, so I'm naturally the target of her fury." "Who?" He signed, glad that his teacher's attention had turned back to him so he didn't have to speak. "Mac is one of our cats. Hitoshi is our son." "They're what?" "He's adopted, of course, and we love him. He's in UA too, actually. The Gen Ed course, but he wants to get into the hero course via the sports festival dash." "Hizashi," Aizawa interrupted. Right. "He'll have the chance to tell you himself when we get there." The rest of the ride was Yamada chattering away, filling what would have been tense silence. Izuku was undeniably apprehensive about the whole ordeal that would take place, but he relaxed into his loud, joyful personality. It reminded him of Mitsu without the cursing. He kept it up until they reached the apartment's door, gesturing for Izuku to open the door. He was very suddenly reminded of everything that had fallen away in Yamada's talk of which cats would love him. Grabbing the doorknob, he twisted it and walked in, the air as empty and cold as the last time he was inside. But now it held something else. Something more. Ayumi peeked around a corner, her face lighting up at the sight of him, and he tilted his head in wonder. She was glowing. And not that she wasn't totally beaming at the sight of him, bustling over with a box in her hands, but she was literally glowing. It was subtle, but in the dim lighting of light bulbs Izuku never bothered to replace, he could most definitely see the halo of brightness around her. Izuku, what's wrong? Mitsu, he guessed she'd come in when he was busy staring at her wife, walked over and cupped his face in her hands. Her golden eyes turned bronze as she activated her quirk. You're glowing. Izuku stared at Mitsu, then glanced back at his teachers. Why are you all glowing? Glowing? Ayumi questioned after setting down her box. We're what? Mitsu looked down at herself, then at everyone else. Aizu, you're seeing something we can't. They have different colors. His hands stilled before he turned to Aizawa, signing, Quirk. Quirk. He raised an eyebrow. You think this is part of your quirk? What else could it be? Mitsu stared at Izuku in wonder, grinning. Kid, what's my color? He focused on her outline. Dark orange. She thought about it, then shrugged with a dramatic sigh. Of course it's dark orange. My childhood decisions are coming back to bite my butt. Ayumi slapped her arm, rolling her eyes fondly. What's mine, Izuku? Bright green. She pumped her fists in the air, shooting him a blinding smile as her wife scoffed. Course you got something vibrant, Yumi, you're an attention hog. She snorted in response. Must I remind you of last year's family cookout? Izuku laughed outright, but Mitsu sputtered in indignation. Yumi, you fiend. Yamada caught his attention with a wave of his hand. What's mine? He asked. Izuku smiled. Yellow like daffodils. Aizawa chuckled and Yamada nodded, putting his hand to his chin in thought. I like it. He decided a moment later. Yours is red. Izuku signed to Aizawa. Like your quirk but softer. Before he got a response, Mei burst into the apartment, nearly knocking over Yamada when he jumped to the side to avoid being hit by the door. Zuku! Her delighted eyes zoomed onto him with her quirk. Mom just told me you arrived. Where were you? Her gleeful attitude staggered at his signing but amped up even higher after the falter. In the courtyard with my babies. Well, a few of yours too, but mostly mine. Did you blow anything up yet? Mei gasped loudly, affronted by his betrayal. Zuki, you wound me, she said, putting her hand over her heart. Of course I have. Are Ms. Ito's plants okay? Ayumi hid her grin behind a webbed hand, but Mitsu groaned, undoubtedly remembering Ms. Ito's horrified face when she saw the charred remnants of her plants. Don't bring that up. She whined. Her pouting face brought a teasing smile to his. The Hatsums always made things better. Shoyuta gave his thanks to the Hatsums as they finished loading the car with Midoriya's meager amount of belongings. Ayumi had signed to him that half the clothing they'd found would have been too small for Midoriya to wear. She told him they were fit for a 6-year-old at best and that her family would take care of donating them. He wondered what Hitoshi was up to. They told him about Midoriya and that he was coming to live with them, but it hadn't garnered much of a reaction. They took him in the same way they did with Midoriya. Drastically different circumstances, but with the same authority to thank for the quick transfer. Shoyuta kept most of what he knew about Midoriya's situation to himself, leaving the chance for Midoriya to open up and keep what Shoyuta knew of his experiences, and more, private until he wanted to tell them. The development of his quirk was odd. The way Midoriya described it to Hisashi, who translated as Shoyuta drove, was that, in the dark, they had glowed. He couldn't see it as well in the light. In fact, he said it was barely visible, likely why he hadn't seen it during school. They would have to test it out later. Midoriya has relaxed his stiff posture after Hisashi started rambling about their cats, And, thinking back to how boisterous the Hatsums were, he'd bet Hisashi reminded him of at least one of them. The tension came back. It crawled into the vehicle slowly as they drove closer, showing in how the boy leaned against the car door and curved his shoulders in. Hisashi kept up his chatter, managing to distract him again, but when they parked, Midoriya's mood dropped instantly. He helped them with the boxes, but his eyes darted around with apprehension in them. He wanted badly to dispel it, to tell Midoriya that he had nothing to be frightened of, but his words would hold no ground. He had been alone for too long to believe the word of a man he met 2 days ago. Once they entered, Hitoshi walked out in a hoodie and jeans, observing Midoriya as much as he observed him. "Good to meet you, Freckles," Hitoshi said. "I'm Hitoshi. Grab your stuff, I'll show you your room," Hitoshi ordered lightly. Midoriya listened and Hitoshi took the rest of the boxes from Hisashi, raising an eyebrow when Shoyuta signed that it was all Midoriya had. When they disappeared down the hall, Shoyuta faced his husband and leaned into his warmth, so thankful to have him. Hisashi wrapped his arms around him and buried his face in Shuta's hair. Midoriya would need support, with what was coming, and they would raise hell to make sure he got it. Izuku entered the room. No, actually he stopped on the threshold to stare at the room in wonder. It was decorated almost exactly like the one he slept in at the Hatsum's house. Their guest room had practically become his bedroom. The furniture was arranged as similar as it could be in the room, considering its shape was different than the one at the Hatsum's. "Pops thought this would make you feel more at home," Hitoshi explained. "Air Yamada." Izuku set his boxes down, sitting on the bed and folding his legs underneath him. "Am I going to get a name, or should I just keep calling you Freckles?" he asked awkwardly. Izuku rushed to sign, "Sorry, I forgot." Ignoring the way Hitoshi faltered, Izuku continued, "I'm Izuku." He fingerspelled his name, offering a small smile. "Izuku?" Hitoshi asked. Izuku nodded. "All right, do you prefer me speaking out loud or would you be more comfortable with sign? My dads didn't tell me much about you." "Both are good," Izuku assured before adding, "I can talk, I just don't want to right now." "So you like cats?" Izuku eyed the lean cat slinking into the room from behind Hitoshi. "Yamada said they only had one orange one and she was named Tora. If I didn't, I don't think I'd be able to live here. Hana already hates my guts. Mutual disgust would be the end of my life, I'm sure." He smiled, if only slightly, as he sat down on the bed. Another cat darted into the room, one of the gray ones, and hit the other cat on its way to Izuku. It jumped into the bed and sat next to him, ignoring the annoyed hiss that sounded from her companion. This one was either Hana or Smoothie. Hitoshi scoffed, crossing his arms as he stared down the cat. It just started rubbing itself over Izuku. "Really, Hana? What's Izuku got that I don't?" "I spend my time with a woman who has a fish mutation quirk," Izuku explained, slowly offering his hand for her to sniff before petting her. He huffed. "You should cherish that advantage. Watch." He stuck his hand out towards them, and Hana hissed before he got too close, darting to Izuku's other side. "See, she's a hate-filled beast." Izuku laughed, and Hitoshi grinned like he won something. The quiet kept him awake, in the end. At the Hatsum's house, there were snores and the whirl of machinery to tide him over, but here, silence reigned. No light, no sound aside from the cats occasionally padding around. The smell of lavender lingered from Hitoshi's prolonged stay. He lasted about an hour of simply staring at his ceiling before sitting up. The desks sat empty, like the closet, and he had no desire to fill them. That would mean accepting that he would be staying here for a long time. He refused. The night bled into early morning and he left the room. Cats bombarded him and twisted themselves around his ankles, but he eventually made it to the kitchen and sat on a stool. The clock declared it 5:38 and a few minutes later, Hitoshi strode in, glowing purple in the darkness. "Heard you get up. Did they take in another insomniac?" he said as he reached for the upper cabinets. "It's quiet here," Izuku said, taking Hitoshi by surprise. "I'm used to ambient noises. Waves and stuff." "Oh, like from your phone?" Hitoshi guessed. Izuku shook his head. "No, I used to sleep on a beach a lot." He pulled out his phone from his pocket and slid it across the counter for him to see. That salvage thing can't project sound anyway, so it's not like I could even if I wanted to. Carefully, as if picking up a baby, Hitoshi lifted his phone from the counter and examined it. They told me you made support gear. I do. Izuku retorted defensively. Then why is this your phone? Can't you, I dunno, make a better one? I guess, he admitted with a shrug. I've just never had to try. May, my friend, says she hates it and that she's making me one for my birthday, so I think I'll just wait and see what she cooks up. Hitoshi stopped making his coffee for a moment to stare at Izuku. Hatsum May? That May. Izuku nodded slowly. Oh wow, I'm not sure you want that phone when she gives it to you. Last I heard, she blew up half the support department. He laughed, imagining her grin as she waltzed out of the smoke waving her wrench around, ideas pouring from her mouth. Definitely that May. You like coffee or? He asked after a moment. I'll take some please. Sliding him a cup and sugar, Hitoshi poured himself a cup. Do you know anyone that's likely to drop out of the hero course? Izuku thought about his classmates and nodded. Apparently we all have potential, according to Aizawa, but there is a boy who acts really pervy when it comes to the girls. Izuku made a displeased face. His name's Mineta and I already threatened to dropkick him yesterday when he started making comments about the girls' costumes. Nice, then I won't have to feel bad about replacing him. Dealing with both of you in class is going to be a nightmare, Aizawa grunted, entering from the hallway. Thank you so much, Hitoshi smirked, raising his mug to his lips. The rest of the morning was spent exchanging light conversation before they were told to get ready for school. Aizawa held him back, switching off the lights. Can you still see it? Yes, he paused. Actually, I think it's brighter. Now. What do you think it means? Aizawa said, turning the lights back on. I'm not sure. Aizawa cut him a look, raising his eyebrow. Fine, I have an empathetic quirk, right? Well, empaths deal with auras all the time, colorful or not. The colors obviously represent the person it surrounds and maybe the color will change with their mood? Or, since my quirk focuses on insecurities, maybe when they start to feel bad something will happen. I mean, I noticed that the air gets really heavy and tastes awful when people aren't in a good mood. Midoriya, the air? Explain. Oh, he said nervously. When we were in the gym it was like something was rotting and I'm pretty sure it was me, but since I can't see my own aura, it might have been you or Yamada since nothing was up with Todoroki. Thank you. Go get ready. The abrupt dismissal jarred him, but he listened. They all rode in the car, Aizawa and Yamada in their hero costumes. Yamada has his hair down, groaning about the time it took to gel. No one spared them a second glance and Hitoshi snickered, telling him that even though he was a popular hero, no one recognized Yamada as present Mike with his hair down. Hitoshi and Izuku parted from the heroes, walking on their own in an odd, but not necessarily uncomfortable silence. Thank you for being so hospitable. Izuku rubbed his thumb nervously across the ratty fabric of his backpack. I know you must not like me barging into your home. You aren't. Huh. Your arrival was sudden but you aren't imposing. Hitoshi caught Izuku's eye, a steady reassuring gleam reflecting in the sun. The moment shattered as the rumble of chatter rose ahead of them. The press? What were they? Oh. A reporter elbowed their way out of the crowd and approached them, shoving a microphone in Izuku's face. Your students here at UA. What do you think of All Might as a teacher? They were quickly swarmed. Izuku stumbled into Hitoshi's side, panic rapidly setting in at the sight of so many people crowding them. Someone put their hand on his shoulder. He jerked away, suppressing the urge to grab their wrist and throw them. A voice spoke, their breath ghosting along the skin of his exposed neck. Too close. Too close. Don't touch me. Don't touch me. Please leave. Get away. Don't. Someone grabbed his wrist and pulled. He tried to wrench himself out of their grip, hysteria and fear leaving him a mess of ragged breaths and blurry vision. The person held on. The noise stopped and the person sat him down somewhere. Izuku, a familiar voice called. You're safe, no one is going to hurt you. But what if I hurt them? I'm dangerous. I can't touch them. Don't touch me. Don't touch me. I won't touch you, I promise. Just breathe with me, it'll be okay. An exaggerated inhale from beside him registered, but barely. Another, this time, he tries to imitate it. Fin. Steady. Toshi. His slurred voice cracked under the pressure of his breaking dignity. He feels distant, yet there. Can I put my hand on your shoulder? After a moment of thought, Izuku nods. The warmth that placed itself onto him is grounding and a much welcome tug back into a more conscious reality. Are you back with me? Yeah, and God, does he hate the tremor he hears? Hitoshi shouldn't have to be here, comforting him. Sorry I had a panic attack? He sighed, pressing his fingers into the back of Izuku's hand, different to the previous touch, present, but not firm. It's not your fault reporters are such inconsiderate assholes. He starts, wanting to say something. He falls short, gazing up to Hitoshi's lavender eyes already observing him carefully. The fingers on his hand don't falter. Thank you. He settles on, unsure that, should he argue, he would make any progress. Be thankful that you still have 2 minutes before we're late to class. Aizawa isn't fond of tardiness. Class, he murmurs. Class, I'm so sorry. Don't be. Let's go. I don't know where your homeroom is, but I doubt you being late would be good either. Ida would flambe me. Izuku agreed, then hesitated. Well, maybe not. But Izuku! Hitoshi yelled, hurrying him. Right. Izuku called, scrambling after him.